Chapter 741. The waning moon hung in the sky, and a cool breeze blew. Under the twilight, the riverbank had a contradictory beauty of noise and quietness. The so-called noise was because there were many people gathered here. It was inevitable that there would be a lot of noise. The reason why it was quiet was because there was a boundless night sky with few stars. The water flowed slowly, and the grass rustled and insects chirped. In front of such beautiful scenery, the lake in one's heart would naturally calm down. But soon, the quiet atmosphere at the lower reaches of the river was completely broken. Dozens of burly men in leather armor and weapons began to clear the area with cold expressions. They drove all the people around the tent 100 meters away. Such tyrannical behavior naturally attracted a lot of dissatisfaction, but these people were obviously not good people. The ordinary people were angry, but they did not dare to say anything. They could only leave. There were also stubborn people or people with some strength who were unyielding and unwilling to leave. However, this situation was resolved smoothly when one of the mercenaries was knocked unconscious on the ground and his body was thrown out like a broken sack. Haha, a bunch of ignorant people. Outside the tent, the middle-aged man withdrew his gaze from the scene in front of him and said with a mocking expression, "Sometimes I'm really curious." A person clearly knows that his strength is much weaker than his opponent, but he doesn't think about how to avoid and save his life. Instead, he just wants to go head-on. Is there any meaning in courting death? Standing beside the middle-aged man was Old Goo. He did not continue the topic, but he knew that the middle-aged man was not only talking about the people in front of him, but also about the opponents they would face tonight, those who provoked the Bounty Hunter Guild. Although he did not get a response, the middle-aged man did not stop talking. He continued, "But it's good. Haha, it's because of these stupid people that the ladder under the successful person's feet will be more stable." The brown-clothed old man did not come tonight. The reason was not important. Anyway, the general meaning was that he was cautious and felt that the other party was not that simple. However, the middle-aged man did not think much of it. With such a luxurious lineup like Old Goo and the huge strength of the Bounty Hunter Guild behind him, he naturally did not care about stupid people who were shooting arrows in the back. In his heart, he was secretly delighted. Since you don't want to come, then I won't be polite and accept this credit. Thinking of this, the middle-aged man smiled and turned to look at the Hansui River 100 meters away. He suggested with a smile, "Haha, Elder Goo, it's still early for negotiations. Why don't we go and admire this famous Hansui River?" Squinting at the quietly flowing black lake water in the distance, Elder Goo pondered for a moment before shaking his head and saying, "There might be danger there." The middle-aged man raised his eyebrows when he heard this. How can there be danger with Elder Goo around? Pausing for a moment, he looked at the silent Elder Goo and thought that he was just being cautious. He waved his hand and said, "If that's the case, then forget it. No matter how famous it is, it's just a river. It doesn't matter if you see it or not." Old Man Goo nodded. When the middle-aged man's back was turned, he frowned slightly. In fact, he wasn't just being cautious when he said that there might be danger. In fact, after arriving here, he could faintly feel a trace of killing intent slowly flowing around him. However, this killing intent was too weak, like catkins in the wind. Although it was there, it was drifting aimlessly. Until now, he had not been able to find the source of this killing intent. This was undoubtedly a little embarrassing, so Elder Goo did not say it out loud. At the same time, the alarm in his heart rang faintly. This was only killing intent. At most, it could only mean that the other party was proficient in assassination. It did not mean anything else. However, Elder Goo had to admit that someone with such assassination skills would not be weak. Therefore, it was better to be cautious. The middle-aged man naturally did not know what Elder Goo was afraid of. Seeing that the expulsion was complete and there were no outsiders within a 100-meter radius, he nodded in satisfaction. Although he despised tonight's opponent, he was not careless when it came to actual operations. There was a reason for him to come here in advance. He had to make preparations in advance so that he could be in place in one step during the battle. However, just as he waved his hand and gave the order, "Sir," an Earth stage martial artist hurriedly ran over from the side, with an ugly expression. "There's a problem." "Hmm?" "We brought a total of 50 guards, but after clearing the area, I counted and found that more than 10 people are missing." "What? How is that possible?" The middle-aged man was shocked and subconsciously looked at Elder Gu beside him. Elder Gu had already narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance. After looking around, he shook his head and said, "In that scene just now, if the assassination had happened 100 meters away, I wouldn't have noticed it." This was the truth. The sky was already dark. In addition, the expulsion scene was noisy. If someone had deliberately looked for an opportunity to assassinate from 100 meters away, Elder Gu and the middle-aged man who were talking just now would not have noticed it. Of course, there was another important prerequisite. The other party's assassination was completed in an instant. The guards here did not resist at all and were directly hit. If there was no noise, no one would notice. The middle-aged man was not stupid. He quickly realized where the problem was. Although he was a little shocked, he immediately calmed down and shook his head with a smile. "Interesting, really interesting. Originally, we planned to take advantage of the negotiation to trick them. Who would have thought that they would be even more straightforward and act so quickly? How dare they?" Taking a deep breath, he decisively waved his hand. "Order everyone to move closer to the tent." Also, before he finished speaking, Elder Goose suddenly turned and shouted, "Who is it?" The Earth Stage warrior also sensed something. Turning his head, he saw a black shadow break through the air. It was very fast, and the target was the middle-aged man beside him. Narrowing his eyes, although he was standing in the opponent's position, the Earth Stage martial artist looked at the whistling arrow and couldn't help but secretly praise the good archery in his heart. To be able to knock an arrow at least 100 meters away in this dusky sky and still be so accurate, it was naturally worthy of praise. But unfortunately, in front of Elder Gu, even the best archery was useless. Sure enough, without seeing Elder Gu do anything, a purple light whizzed out and instantly intercepted the arrow in midair. But also at this time, Elder Gu's face suddenly changed. Damn it, bang, the arrow shattered. Boom! Flames soared into the sky and waves of air rolled. In an instant, it spread close to the tent that had just been set up not long ago. Explosive arrow? The Earth Stage warrior came to a realization and took a step forward, blocking in front of the middle-aged man. Although the explosive arrow's power wasn't small, because it was intercepted halfway, it didn't spread to this side. But before the flames in front of him dissipated, whoosh, 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 another 3 arrows came, still in the direction of the middle-aged man's original position. But the target changed to the Earth Stage warrior blocking in front of him. Again, without needing Elder Gu to make a move, the Earth Stage warrior roared and slashed with his sword. A red crescent sword instantly flew out and domineeringly crushed the arrows again. Boom, boom, boom. It was still an explosive arrow. Elder Gu. The middle-aged man came back to his senses, his face ashen. He turned his head and shouted at Elder Gu, obviously wanting him to chase and kill the opponent. His feet moved, but Elder Gu still felt traces of killing intent around him. He shook his head and looked at the Earth Stage warrior beside him. Let the 3 of them chase. The opponent has about 10 people. And it's not suitable for me to leave. Hearing this, the middle-aged man was slightly startled. Then he slapped his forehead and instantly reacted. Yes, if he let Elder Gu leave, it was very likely that he would fall into the opponent's trap. There were originally 5 Earth Stage warriors this time, but the brown-clothed old man didn't come, so 2 of them had to stay behind to protect him. The Earth Stage warrior, standing in front of the middle-aged man, nodded. He gestured to his 2 companions not far away and hurriedly chased towards the south where the arrows came from. Sure enough, after the 3 Earth Stage warriors left the pursuit, the accurate arrows didn't appear again. Seeing this, the middle-aged man was relieved. He waved his hand and ordered the scattered guard around to quickly gather here, cursing coldly, "Damn it, a bunch of bastards, don't let me catch you, or I'll let you know what it means to beg for death, but can't beg for life." "Sir." At this time, Elder Goose suddenly interrupted. He frowned and hesitated, but still said, "There's an expert. Don't leave within 10 steps of me." "Huh?" The middle-aged man was stunned. From the beginning to the end, even if he saw the godly archery skill just now, he didn't think that the opponent was anything special. He still thought that as long as he could track down the opponent, the strength of the lineup here would be able to crush the opponent. However, the restriction of 10 steps from Elder Gu clearly told him that it was no longer a question of whether or not he could kill the opponent, but whether or not he could keep his life. At this moment, the middle-aged man was a little panicked. He felt that he had kicked an iron plate this time. Chapter 742. On the dark street, there were many buildings. Several figures were running wildly, as if they were hiding from something. Suddenly, dodge! With a roar, the running figures dispersed instantly. Then, a bright sword light swept through the air with a whistling sound. Boom! There was a violent explosion, and the wall of the house on one side was cut down like a pile of flour. Dust flew, and the oil lamp in the house was weak. An ordinary family of 3 was sitting at the dining table, holding a knife and fork, staring blankly at the disappearing wall and the night sky outside. They were speechless for a moment. Then, a high-pitched scream sounded, and it was quickly echoed by the street, one after another. As the saying goes, when the city gate is on fire, the fish in the moat will suffer. Fortunately, most of the South City district was located in the slums of various cities, and Hanshui City was no exception. The crowd here was not dense, and the chaos came and went quickly, so there were not many casualties, which was a blessing in disguise. Cough, cough. David coughed repeatedly and jumped out of the rolling dust in a sorry state. He quickly looked around and saw several members of the gray space running out from various places. Then he took a few steps forward, kicked half of the wall, and pulled out a member with bad luck. He threw him to the members of the gray space and waved his heavy sword. Quick, take him away. I'll cover the rear. The few people did not argue, and quickly carried their injured companion and continued to flee south. Turning his head again, David saw an Earth Stage warrior holding a long saber turn around the corner of the street. Looking at each other, the Earth Stage warrior grinned cruelly. Hee, bastard, why aren't you running? Before he finished speaking, David's heavy sword had already slashed down, and the fiery red sword light quickly swept across the street more than 10 feet, chopping down on the head. The sword just came out, and it did not stop, slashing out more than 10 sword lights in a row. Then he panted and cursed. Bastard, you're still F*** king chattering in a fight. You're courting death. The Earth Stage warrior's face was ashen, and the fighting light around him tumbled violently. He did not dodge, and stepped forward, directly waving his sword to smash the 10 sword lights coming at him. Boom! Boom! The air exploded, and the crystal glass of the surrounding houses shattered in an instant. Although there were many fiery red sword rays, they could not withstand the tyrannical blade of an Earth Stage martial artist, and were continuously chopped into pieces. But David acted as if he didn't see it. He was still waving his arms on the spot, squeezing out the battle energy in his body and unyieldingly striking out one long-range sword beam after another. He was like a one-armed mantis facing a wheel. He seemed to be courting death, but his spirit was high and solemn. However, the most important factor in determining the outcome of a battle was always one's strength. Thus, the Earth rank martial artist's advancing footsteps didn't pause in the slightest. Finally, when both sides were 10 meters apart, the Earth rank martial artist's face revealed a sinister smile, and he fiercely raised his blazing saber. Insect, the game is over. Die. Damn it, it's you again. With a curse, the flustered and exasperated Earth Stage martial artist forcefully twisted his waist and turned around, pulling back his long saber and slashing to the left. Over there, 3 arrows were shot out soundlessly amidst the explosions. The next moment, a broadsword light that covered a wide area rushed out without delay, intercepting the 3 arrows that were about to hit him. Boom! Another exploding arrow. Under the rolling waves of air, the extremely depressed Earth Stage martial artist who was the closest had no choice but to fly back, his face extremely ugly. This wasn't the first time. Ever since the three Earth stage martial artists chased out from the riverbank, they found that the number of people on the other side was really not small. There were about 30 people who kept popping out. However, although these people's strength was not bad, in their eyes, they were naturally inferior. What was more troublesome was that the other side's escaping skills were first class, so they wasted a lot of time. Of course, this was only a small problem. After all, the difference in strength between the two sides was there. David and the other's speed was not as abnormal as Tangen's, so these Earth stage martial artists were still confident in killing the other side. But now, the result was not so. The reason was very simple. Every time they reached the critical moment of killing, there would always be an exploding arrow that would accurately attack from the dark, forcefully disrupting the rhythm of the battle, causing them to fall short of success. It wasn't that they didn't think of killing this annoying archer first, but they were really too few in number. Not to mention that the archer maintained a good distance from them. If they were to pull out one person to chase after him, they would fall into a vicious circle of entanglement with the others. It was really frustrating. Sure enough, after the explosion and smoke dissipated, David disappeared from sight again. Looking up and roaring, he waved his long sword in annoyance. The Earth stage martial artist could only madly chase after him again. And in this short period of time, on another street. Huff, huff! David's chest heaved up and down rapidly like a broken bellows as large beads of sweat dripped down his forehead as he gasped for breath. Huff, huff! Holding onto the illuminating crystal pillar, David's chest heaved up and down rapidly like a broken bellows. The Earth stage martial artist was depressed, but David and the others were also sullen. Now in the gray space, other than Tang Yin, David's strength was the highest, a beginner high-level martial artist. In just 2 years of cultivation, he had transformed from a rookie who had just learned Do Chi to a high-level martial artist. The speed of his strength growth was amazing. But unfortunately, this strength was far from enough, especially in the face of the Earth stage martial artist chasing after him. The gap between the realms made him constantly flee in a sorry state without any power to fight back. After panting for a few seconds, bang, David hammered the illuminating crystal pillar and looked at the shadow of the city wall under the night sky in the south. He muttered to himself, "It's up to you, Harry. Please don't let anything go wrong." Then he shook his head and was about to continue fleeing. But at this moment, whoosh, a figure rushed out from the alley across the street. It seemed to be heavily injured. It couldn't stop in time and directly crashed into the illuminating crystal pillar. David's eyelids twitched, and he subconsciously raised his sword to slash. But his expression changed instantly. He quickly reached out and supported the figure covered in blood. "Reggie, what happened to you?" Reggie was a member of the second stage of the gray space, and was also a member of David's team. Unexpectedly, after Reggie was rescued, he was not happy to see David. Instead, he was shocked. He waved his hands and said anxiously, "Run, Puff. Captain, run, run." It's too late. At the entrance of the alley, the Earth stage martial artist walked out with a ferocious expression and looked at David with a smile. Another one. Looks like my luck has gotten better. It had indeed gotten better. From the black ash on the Earth stage martial artist's face, it was obvious that he had suffered a lot from the explosive arrows. Now that he finally had an opportunity and was pleasantly surprised, he was naturally overjoyed. Seeing this, David couldn't help but understand. He didn't know what had happened for Reggie to be chased by the other party alone. Reggie's strength was inferior to Luke's, so even with Luke's help, he couldn't escape. Originally, Reggie should have been thinking of running as far as he could. Even if he couldn't escape death, he should try his best to lure the other party away. Who would have thought that in the end he would run into Luke? He was unjustly implicated. David laughed bitterly. He didn't have time to think about anything else. He grabbed Reggie's collar and ran south along the street. "Captain, don't worry about me." "Shut up," David reprimanded without turning his head as he stared at the Earth stage martial artist's raised sword from the corner of his eye. In fact, since the two sides were so close, it didn't make a difference whether David saved Reggie or not. The reason why he chose to save him now was because he wasn't used to watching his own people die in front of him. It was that simple. Hee hee, how touching. Then, the Earth Stage martial artist revealed a mocking expression when he saw this. His eyes flashed as he slashed down with his sword. Let's die together. The light was dazzling. David had been waiting for this moment. He suddenly flew out, rolled, and boom. Just as he was about to escape from the range of the sword light, a burning pain on his back instantly assaulted him. He couldn't help but taste something sweet in his throat. He opened his mouth and spat out a large mouthful of blood. Although he was very unwilling, this was the limit of what David could do. He knew very well in his heart that before he could even stand up, another sword light would strike swiftly towards him and put an end to this final struggle of his. But at this moment, suddenly, before the roar fell, the sound of metal clashing rang out like rain hitting banana leaves. It was extremely shocking. Hearing this, David turned around in shock and saw a black figure flashing around the Earth Stage martial artist in the middle of the dark street. Dodging like a ghost, attacking. The high frequency of blade light flashing like fireworks was too much for the eyes to take in. No one knew when this black figure came, and the Earth Stage martial artist obviously didn't know either. So even though he had a body full of domineering Do Chi, he was caught off guard when he was instantly attacked. Even if he roared again and again, he couldn't change the current situation of being flustered. Looking at the familiar battle rhythm of this black figure, David unconsciously opened his mouth and was completely stunned. It was also at this moment that a silver light flashed in front of him. David seemed to see a silver mask and also saw a very familiar gaze. The meaning of the gaze was obvious. Go! His body trembled. After receiving this tacit message, David subconsciously turned over and quickly ran away. Damn it! Roar! Seeing the cooked duck fly away, the Earth Stage martial artist immediately panicked. His eyes were red as he madly exploded with Do Chi. But unfortunately, the distance between them was truly too close. No matter how he erupted, there was always a wisp of blade light that followed closely behind him like a shadow, and it forced him to have no choice but to dodge. It was impossible for him to escape in a short period of time. On the other side, Lei Ji, who was on David's back, blinked in shock. He looked back and asked hesitantly, "Captain, was that just now?" He rudely interrupted. "What was it?" "Huff." Panting, David said firmly, "You were too heavily injured just now. You saw wrongly." Oh, Lei Ji, who was a little confused, didn't know that David, whose back was facing him, was laughing silently at this moment. "Haha, you really didn't die. I knew you wouldn't die." Looking up in ecstasy, the southern city wall was right in front of him. Chapter 743. Beside Hansui River. Damn it, why aren't they back yet? Walking back and forth, the middle-aged man listened to the occasional explosions from the south, his face full of anxiety. This kind of anxiety was complicated, not only because the Earth Stage warriors had not finished off their opponents, but also because his own safety was not guaranteed. Of course, more importantly, this matter was gradually going out of control. The middle-aged man still did not understand. It should have been an easy mission to earn merits, but how did it end up like this? He suddenly stopped and looked at old Gu, who was still frowning with a dissatisfied expression. "You still haven't found that person?" Feeling the trace of killing intent that had not dissipated, old Gu shook his head silently, his expression a little ugly. To be honest, as time passed, old Gu was now a little scared. The opponent's state was too stable. The killing intent was clearly condensed and did not dissipate, but he could control it to an extent that he could not detect. This was really frightening. At least, old Gu had never heard of such a person among the countless assassins and bounty hunters he had seen, and no one had ever been able to do this. The middle-aged man did not know this. Although he had some strength, he was not even an Earth Stage warrior, so naturally he could not detect the faint killing intent. Seeing this, he was very dissatisfied and was about to say something, but unexpectedly, there was a sudden commotion outside the river. Clop, 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 clop. Standard bronze armor. The guards had arrived. The explosions in the south of Hansui City were obviously abnormal, and the source of the chaos was here, so it was no surprise that the guards came to investigate. But the middle-aged man was in a depressed mood, so he naturally did not have time to argue with these people, and looked directly at old Gu. The latter nodded, his green robe fluttering without wind, and his body slowly floated up. Because he was afraid of the killing intent, he did not rise too high, only about 2 feet above the ground. But without a doubt, even if old Gu did not float high, it was enough to stun the bold onlookers and the guards who had just arrived. Reaching out, his body suddenly bloomed with a dazzling green light. Boom, boom, boom. The Hansui River 100 meters away seemed to have been thrown into several exploding crystals. Suddenly, waves surged, and waves rolled restlessly. Waves of water slapped the riverbank, creating countless waves. In front of such a spectacular scene, the neighing of horses came from afar. Seeing this, the guards were very tactful, and without saying anything, they turned their horses around and ran away. What? Professional integrity? Don't joke around. This is no longer a matter of being afraid of death. It's a matter of seeking death. Whoosh! Chaos ensued. Along with the garrison cavalry, the people on the banks of the river also fled. Initially, he was a little displeased when he saw the other party domineeringly occupying the lower reaches of the river. However, because the riverbank was extremely vast, he didn't pay it any mind since it didn't concern him. But after old Gu revealed such a shocking move, no one could remain calm. Everyone knew the terrifying destructive power of a void-level cultivator. As a result, no one dared to stay here any longer. They all ran away in an instant. The middle-aged man raised his eyebrows when he saw this. Old Gu was here to protect him. With such a powerful bodyguard by his side, he naturally felt more at ease. The dissatisfaction from before instantly disappeared. He smiled and said to old Gu, Old Gu, you're quite skilled." He reluctantly nodded his head. The fine wrinkles between his brows had yet to disappear. In fact, the reason why he had used the frigid water river to show off his might was not a casual decision. Instead, he had considered that the frigid water river was undoubtedly the most suitable place to hide in the surrounding environment. That was why he had randomly bombarded the area. If the other party was really hiding in the water, even if he couldn't force the other party out, he would definitely be able to disrupt the faint killing intent. Of course, he could also use this to determine the other party's location. But the result was not successful. The surrounding killing intent did not fluctuate at all. It was still faint. Obviously, he had guessed wrong. The other party was not hiding in the water. Where was he hiding? Old Gu took a deep breath and suppressed the restlessness in his heart. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the empty riverbank. He muttered to himself, and at this moment, suddenly, boom, with a muffled tremor, a flame suddenly shot up into the sky from the south. Although it was far from here, one could still faintly feel the ground constantly trembling. As such, there was no need to mention the location of the incident. If the loud noise from the frigid water river was the effect of the exploding crystal, then this was the sound of thunder directly exploding in one's ears. The power was terrifying. The middle-aged man heard the sound and suddenly turned his head. He stared blankly at the flame and opened his mouth. What's going on? On a roof somewhere on the opposite side of the river. When the violent explosion sounded, little Carol's body suddenly shook. She seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly rushed to the roof. She put on binoculars and looked at the southern city wall. The twilight was dim, but the binoculars with the eagle eye spell were indeed extraordinary. Although it did not have the effect of night vision, she could still barely make out a long metal pipe sticking out of the city wall. It was not facing outside the city, but somewhere inside the city. It stood upright, like a forest python bearing its fangs. What's wrong? Little Carol, what did you see? Lena asked anxiously. She did not have time to pray. Mjolnir, little Carol muttered in a low voice. She slowly put down the binoculars. Her small face was filled with realization. So this is a borrowed flower offering to Buddha. Little Carol knew that Tang and was being chased by Sang, Pooh, and Oliver of the Twilight Hunter group. Naturally, she also knew that Oliver was blasted to death by bows using several Mjolnir on the city wall. Tangen's plan this time undoubtedly borrowed Bose's idea and then offered it to the Bounty Hunter Guild. After a little explanation, Lena's eyes suddenly widened. Mjolnir? This is Mr. Arthur's idea? So the other party has been blasted to death? Do we win? Another series of questions. Little Carol could not help but rub her forehead. She looked at the other side of the river and shook her head. Just now, only a few people chased out. The master is not dead yet. This battle has just begun. But, after a pause, she said with certainty, this is a good opportunity. Brothers should take action. Little Carol wanted to raise the binoculars again, but in the end, she did not dare to. She could only stare with Lena at the dark eastern side of the river with her eyes wide open. Not to mention whether Little Carol's guess was accurate. The group of people on the other side of the river was now in doubt. Little Carol and the others could rely on the binoculars to know the inside story of the explosion, but the middle-aged man and the others obviously did not know. This had nothing to do with strength. The twilight was dim, and even Old Goo could not see clearly what was going on with the explosion. There was fire just now. Was it an exploding crystal? Looking at this terrifying power, the middle-aged man felt very insecure and could not help but guess anxiously. It's possible. Well, a fire great magician should also be able to produce this power. An Earth Stage warrior can barely produce this effect with some tools. Old Goo analyzed with a frown. So, Old Goo, you think there's a fire great magician among them? An Earth Stage warrior? Oh, and a mysterious master that you have been unable to find? These are only possibilities. Sir, please calm down. F***CK, calm down. Suddenly roaring. The middle-aged man's face was ferocious and distorted. He kept hammering his palms and pacing back and forth. I don't understand. Aren't they just a bunch of idiots? Why are they so difficult to deal with? Magician, Earth Stage warrior, mysterious master, you F***er. He suddenly waved his hand and roared madly at the dark riverbank. Come out. What else is there? If you have the guts, come out. Seeing this, Old Man Goo couldn't help but frown. He opened his mouth to say something, but suddenly turned his head. From the south, a figure was dragging a heavy sword as he staggered over. It was one of the 3 Earth-grade warriors. But at this time, he didn't have the elegant demeanor of an expert from before. His face was covered in soot and his clothes were ragged. Although it was impossible to see clearly because of the dark sky, he must have been seriously injured. Quick, bring him over. Seeing the Earth Stage warrior turn around, the middle-aged man could not help but shout in joy. After chasing him for so long, he should know the identity and strength of the other party. Hearing this, a few guards went up and wanted to support him, but they were pushed away by the Earth Stage martial artist. As he ran towards the middle-aged man, he shouted loudly, Sir, we've been tricked. The middle-aged man was stunned. A trap? What trap? Continuing to run, he panted and said, We chased that group of people close to the southern city wall. Just as we were about to successfully kill the other party, we were unexpectedly blasted by the thunder god's hammer on the city wall. Ah, what? The middle-aged man could not help but cry out in alarm, stupefied. This. How the F***CK can this be done? On the side, Old Goo was also surprised when he heard this, but his expression was mixed with other meanings, and he frowned slightly. It seemed that he had forgotten something. What exactly was it? I saw the opportunity early and ran quickly, but they saw. Covering his face and shaking his head, the Earth Stage warrior walked over with a mournful expression, sighing repeatedly. Coming back to his senses, the middle-aged man clenched his fists, the corners of his eyes twitching, and his words were so stiff that it seemed to directly jump out from between his teeth. This group of trash. I swear I won't let go. Before he could finish speaking, a furious roar that was mixed with fear suddenly sounded out. That's not right. Sir, be careful. Huh. Chapter 744. P.S. This chapter's content won't be separated to get clicks. In Hurry up and use your recommendation tickets to kill this kind of raccoon. Carrot, carrot, no. Sir, be careful. At this time, Elder Goo finally realized that he had forgotten something. The faint killing intent that was always around him had quietly disappeared at some point. This meant that there were only two possibilities. First, the opponent had retreated. Second, he was ready to attack. After accumulating power for such a long time, the possibility of retreating was naturally very small. And if he were to make a move, this Earth stage expert who had coincidentally arrived was undoubtedly the most suspicious. And the reason why he had made such a low-level mistake and forgotten that his killing intent had disappeared was mainly because this Earth stage expert's words were too shocking. He had fallen into a trap, and the Mjolnir had hindered his calm thinking. When the two were combined, Elder Goo's expression suddenly changed. He roared a warning and then rushed forward. At the same time, several diamond-shaped green lights were constantly thrown out from his hands. But at this time, with a loud laugh, the Earth-level expert, who seemed to be riddled with injuries, Tang In, suddenly rushed forward. One was intentional, the other was intentional. Coupled with Tang Un's abnormal speed, they instantly dodged the green light attack and arrived at the side of the middle-aged man who was in a daze. He flipped his hand and revealed a dagger. "You dare?" Elder Goo roared in anger. He raised his hand and was about to release a terrifying light. But at this time, Tang In's figure had already shrunk behind the middle-aged man, and the dagger was on his neck. Following that, the two figures kept flickering in close proximity. Tang In firmly controlled the middle-aged man and kept facing Old Man Goo head-on. After switching positions several times, the two figures suddenly separated and the fighting aura stagnated. Old Man Goo did not dare to attack because he was afraid of breaking the vases. The riverbank was quiet. In just a short breath, the situation was reversed. The surrounding guild guards stood like statues. They were stunned and couldn't recover for a while. This was the so-called assassin, not moving, hiding in the abyss, moving, laughing in the sky. Hee, old man, you're too slow. Slightly poking out half of his head, Tang In grinned and smiled with a relaxed expression. Of course, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Capturing someone under the nose of a void-grade cultivator, the danger was self-evident. Fortunately, his previous calculations had gone smoothly, and he had finally succeeded. "How dare you? Bastard, let her go. Let go of my lord, or else I can guarantee that you will die a horrible death." Amidst the clamor, the middle-aged man's voice trembled. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He opened his mouth to speak. "Who are you, ah?" The middle-aged man screamed miserably as if he was struck by lightning. His body shook violently, and under the pressure of Tang In's palm, he was like a fish swimming on the shore, struggling and wailing incessantly. In an instant, the surrounding guild guards who had been clamoring to press down on them stopped in their tracks and fell completely silent. Tang In slowly withdrew the dagger from the man's thigh. Smelly blood continued to gush out. Tang In's expression was indifferent as he patted the middle-aged man's cheek with the bloody dagger. As a captive, you should have the awareness of a captive. If I don't ask you to speak, don't speak. Do you understand? Looking at the familiar and calm face, the strange, crazy, and slightly neurotic gaze, and the strong smell of blood in his nose, the middle-aged man nodded subconsciously. His lips were tightly pursed, and his pale face was filled with fear. Very good. Tang In nodded lightly without any expression. Acting like a crazy person at the right time would cause the other party to feel an unpredictable fear, and it would also cause them to be restrained. Sure enough, when old Goo saw Tang In stabbing him so straightforwardly, the corner of his eyes twitched involuntarily. With a sinister expression, he said stiffly, "No matter who you are, you will not leave today." "Oh, is that so?" Tang In shrugged indifferently and took a step back. He grabbed the middle-aged man's throat and slowly retreated toward the Hansui River. "If I leave, what can you do to me?" Old Goo's gaze turned even colder when he saw this. His expression kept changing, as if he was considering whether to attack directly. It was true that the middle-aged man was a higher-up, but it was also because of this that he knew too much about the Bounty Hunter Association. Naturally, he couldn't let anyone take him away alive. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. The middle-aged man was also a smart person. When he saw Old Goo's expression, he immediately understood and shouted anxiously, "No one is allowed to attack." I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak." Tangen's long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at the guards who were looking at each other in dismay and slowly retreated while holding the middle-aged man hostage. He said with a smile, "It's okay, you can continue." Thank you. Even ants cherish their lives, let alone this powerful middle-aged man. He first heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this, and then he shouted repeatedly, "No one is allowed to attack without my order, otherwise I won't let," before he finished speaking. "Shut up." With a stern shout, Old Goose suddenly took a step forward. Fighting light flickered around his body as he looked at the middle-aged man and said in a deep voice, "You should know your identity and the consequences of being captured. You only have yourself to blame for the current situation. You can't blame anyone." Haha, I knew you people were unreliable. Seeing that Old Goo was about to attack, Tang didn't look nervous at all. He just shook his head and laughed. "If that's the case, then you're useless." His tone suddenly became piercingly cold. The blade light in his right hand instantly swept across the middle-aged man's throat, causing blood to spurt out. "No!" The middle-aged man only spat out half a syllable before he rolled his eyes and lowered his head with an ashen face. All the guards, including Old Goo, were stunned when they saw this. Although they had made up their minds, they didn't expect Tang to do it so decisively and so ruthlessly. When they came back to their senses, they saw Tang lift the middle-aged man by the back of his collar and casually throw him back into the Hansui River, which was dozens of meters away. "Damn it, go to hell." Old Goo was the first to react. He stomped on the ground and chased after Tang who was retreating rapidly, with monstrous killing intent. Although the middle-aged man died because of him, it was easy to explain in the situation just now. Of course, there had to be a prerequisite for this explanation, which was that he had to kill Tang. Although Tang escaped first with Old Goo's void-level cultivation, he naturally didn't care about the distance. Although he couldn't keep up with his speed, he could still attack. As he ran, he suddenly raised his arm. The green light was dazzling. The fighting aura that had been brewing for a long time was like a flood, covering a large area. Boom! 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 The continuous explosions instantly submerged the 100-meter river embankment. Broken soil flew everywhere, and the ground trembled like a giant python turning over. The power was really terrifying. This was the advantage of the fighting aura warriors from another world. Although Tang despised their power for not being concentrated enough and wasting most of it, this kind of fighting aura could be used in a large-scale battle. But in this kind of large-scale suppression, it also had a unique effect. With an unreasonable and indiscriminate bombardment, it was impossible for anything not to die, even if they didn't want to. Although the airwaves were tumbling and the scene was extremely turbid, under Old Man Goo's gaze, he could still see Twain's figure moving and flashing within. He brazenly advanced dozens of meters, but before he reached the riverbank, he was completely engulfed by the continuous explosions. After about 10 seconds, the explosions suddenly stopped. Old Goo's figure slowly descended from the sky. He paused and couldn't help but frown slightly as he looked around. For some reason, although he saw the opponent die with his own eyes, he still had a strange feeling in his heart. The figure just now seemed a little weak. Was it an illusion? Just as he was wondering, Old Goo's body suddenly shook. His expression changed greatly, and he subconsciously shook his body. Puff! A pockmarked dagger pierced through his left shoulder and cut off a section of his collarbone. The intense pain instantly spread throughout his body. "Are you looking for me?" This was not a response, but a muffled groan from Old Goo. However, although his expression was frightened, there was also a little joy at the same time. If he didn't subconsciously shake his body just now, it should have been his heart that was pierced. Roar. Roaring in a low voice, Old Man Gu was extremely decisive. Even though he did not know how the other party had managed to escape the explosion, he knew that since the other party had already stealthily crept up behind him, it was impossible for the other party to only leave a wound. Without hesitation, he heavily slapped his left shoulder with his right hand wrapped in brilliant green light. Bang! Puff! Even though Old Gu was a void-level cultivator, he couldn't help but spit out a large amount of blood. However, his choice was undoubtedly correct because the dagger that was going to cut his heart had been knocked out of his body by him. Of course, for this, he also paid a terrible price. Half of his body was almost paralyzed. He suddenly turned around and screamed. His vision was completely filled with dense and crisscrossing blood threads. While you're sick, I'll take your life. With the unexpected shadow doppelganger skill, Tang In had established a great opening in one fell swoop. Naturally, Tang In would not hold back. Once again, he closed in on Old Gu and attacked like a storm. One careless move, and the whole game was lost. Not only was Old Gu in a half-crippled state, but he was also pulled into a battle rhythm by Tang In. In close combat, it could be said that when it rains, it pours. His void-level cultivation was suppressed to the lowest level. Even though he managed to pull out a short sword in time, and seemed to be an expert in close combat, under Twain's relentless pressure, he could only parry and was unable to retaliate. Finally, after retreating more than 10 steps, Old Gu anxiously roared, "What are you standing there for? Come and help." This sentence was undoubtedly said to those dumbstruck guards. Not to mention whether this would be effective, a void-level cultivator was reduced to needing the help of weak guards. This in itself was a strange thing. It also showed the huge pressure Old Gu was facing now. Yes. The dozens of guards didn't think much and immediately pulled out their weapons. With Tang Un's ghostly movement, they naturally couldn't stand on the periphery and release their Do Chi. It would be easy to accidentally injure Old Gu, who was already in danger, so they could only bite the bullet and fight in close combat. Tang In didn't panic when he saw this. Instead, he curled his lips and let out a chuckle. Tang In was very clear about what Old Gu was planning. These weak guards were actually here to be cannon fodder. Perhaps even Old Gu himself did not believe that they could affect the situation of the battle. He only hoped to use them to find an opening under Twain's storm-like attacks and take the opportunity to escape. However, if you want to escape like this, you're looking down on me. Narrowing his long and narrow eyes, Tang In calmly dodged, avoiding the guard's attack behind him. He also moved to Old Gu's side. The dagger in his right hand didn't stop attacking. At the same time, with a wave of his left hand, blood gathered and instantly condensed into a blood-red dagger. He slit the throat of the guard just now. Empyrean Bloodblade. During the period of seclusion, not only did Tang In get a glimpse of the mysteries of space, but he also reorganized his skills and strength. The Empyrean Bloodblade that was previously unreliable could now be summoned stably. Of course, the current Empyrean Bloodblade skill level was low. It was impossible to break through Old Gu's Do Chi armor, but it was more than enough to deal with weak guards. Dual dagger, multitasking, stab, slice, point, pull, combined attack. Although Tang In wasn't very familiar with this kind of fighting style, precise control over a small area was his strength. Therefore, after a round of fighting, Old Gu was shocked to find that not only did his opponent's strength not weaken at all, but the two daggers' combined attack even made him flustered. Overreaching himself, realizing this, Old Gu couldn't help but feel bitter. He was extremely depressed and roared in his heart. Where the hell did this abnormal martial artist come from? Old Gu was able to touch the threshold of the Void Realm, so his vision of martial arts was naturally better than others. But looking at all the opponents he had met in his life, he still couldn't think of anyone who was similar to this guy in front of him. Old Gu had met many close combat experts. Assassins and bounty hunters were originally fond of this kind of fighting style, and he himself was also an expert. But as his strength gradually increased, he gradually abandoned this fighting style. The reason for this was very simple. With the presence of pure Do Chi that could suppress a large area of effect, Who would be willing to use a short blade to engage in close combat with an opponent? Not to mention the unpredictable dangers involved. This situation was clearly much more stingy. But now, Old Goo looked at the seamless, meticulous, and extremely reasonable attack in front of him, which didn't even allow him to breathe, and realized that he was very wrong. Or rather, it wasn't that he was wrong, but that the opponent was too abnormal. There really was someone who specialized in this kind of extremely stingy fighting style. Wasn't he afraid that this martial path would become narrower and narrower? Of course, Tang Yin's martial path didn't need others to worry about. At this point, the hope of survival in Old Goo's heart was gradually dimming. He was very clear that he had been pulled into the rhythm of the battle that the opponent was good at. If there were no accidents, he would be ground to death by this blunt knife, grinding method. Exploding dough chi? Using a big move? Flying into the air? There was no need to think about it. These methods all required distance or time to accumulate power. But now, as long as he was slightly careless, there would be a few holes in his vital parts. Thinking of this, Old Goo took another step back. His body couldn't help but sway, but he suddenly missed a step. It turned out that in this breathless attack, he had unknowingly retreated to the river bank. Now his right leg was completely submerged in the river. Damn it! He was already in danger, and now he made such a low-level mistake. Old Goo's heart sank. Sure enough, Tang Yin didn't have a reason to miss this opportunity. His eyes brightened, and he calmly leaned back, knocking the guard behind him back and causing him to vomit blood and fly back. Then he suddenly accelerated and flashed in front of Old Goo. Thousands of blood-colored blades turned into one, stabbing rapidly like a comet falling to the ground. Poof! The moment before entering the water, the guard who didn't die saw Old Goo's chest being pierced by the dagger. Then with a boom, splash water splashed everywhere, drenching the guard in a daze. Under the water, Old Goo didn't give up. First, he barely moved his body sideways to avoid being hit in his vital parts. Then, he wanted to seize this opportunity to counterattack, but he realized that it was the strange-looking blood-colored dagger that had pierced his body. Then, the blade flashed in front of his eyes. He saw Tang Yin raise his right hand slightly, and the pitch-black dagger nimbly twirl between his fingers. Holding the hilt, he suddenly stabbed downwards. Poof! There was another soft sound of a blade piercing into flesh. Wisps of blood continuously floated out from the vital parts of his left chest, but were instantly diluted and washed away by the river water. Old Goo didn't die. His right hand was holding the dagger tightly, preventing it from pressing into his heart. Whoosh! Like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake, the two figures entangled together and kept sinking. They were very close to each other, and their hair was tangled together. Tang Yin could see Old Goo's tightly clenched teeth, and Old Goo could also see Tang Yin's long and narrow eyes that were still sharp and bright in the pitch-black lake water, as if there were flames burning in them. In such an environment, the two naturally couldn't speak, but they could clearly feel each other's persistence. Die! 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 Tang Yin held the hilt of the dagger tightly with both hands. His arms emitted a deep, blood-colored light that sparkled like waves. It was as if blood was flowing continuously from his arms to his palms, and then from his palms to the dagger. It pressed down forcefully. Get lost! Get lost! Get lost! Old Goo held the dagger tightly with one hand, and his expression was somewhat twisted and ferocious. A bright green glow suddenly surged out from his body, and he resisted the dagger's pressure with all his might. The blood-colored glow was deep and bottomless, and the murderous aura was intense. The green glow was dazzling, and the aura of violence was strong. Contact, entanglement, rejection, explosion. A part of the water was stirred up by the green and red glow, and the undercurrent surged violently. On the Hansui River, suddenly, there was a rumbling sound as the blue waves surged and spun, angrily slapping both sides of the river. The turbid waves rose into the sky, and the momentum was terrifying. The guard on the river bank, who were watching the water, were caught off guard and were hit by several huge waves. They couldn't help but vomit blood and fly back, falling several feet away. Then, without wiping the blood from the corners of their mouths, they stood up and stared blankly at the violent river, motionless. On a rooftop on the other side of the river, little Carl held up a telescope and stared at the turbulent river. Her small face was solemn, and her fists were clenched tightly. Lena, who was at the side, didn't dare to open her eyes to look. Her delicate body trembled, and her 10 fingers were clasped tightly in front of her forehead. Her lips trembled as she constantly muttered prayers. If there really was a God of light in this world, then he probably wouldn't bless a heretic like Tang Yin. Of course, Tang Yin didn't need it either. He only believed in his own hands. And now, the opportunity had come. The Hansui River was very deep, but it definitely had a bottom. Now, the bottom of the river was not far from Tang Yin. Due to the angle, Old Gu definitely couldn't see the situation behind him. He only knew that Tang, and in front of him was constantly erupting with blood-red fighting aura. So the two of them were falling very quickly, very quickly. Finally, boom! With the sound of his back being solid, the dagger pierced into Old Gu's heart with the rebound force of the straw that broke the camel's back. Gurgle, gurgle. A series of bubbles kept coming out of Old Gu's mouth, mixed with obvious thick blood. It's over. With an extremely unwilling gaze, Old Gu's head tilted weakly to the side. But at this moment, his eyes suddenly flashed as if he was on his deathbed. Not far from them, a figure was constantly struggling in the water, struggling to swim upstream. However, his legs didn't seem to be very nimble, which seriously affected his speed of ascension. It was that middle-aged man. He actually didn't die. When Old Gu saw this, he suddenly understood. Obviously, the reason why he didn't die wasn't because the other party failed, but because the other party didn't want to kill him at all. It looked like the other party had slit his throat, but in fact, it was just a smokescreen. And if he thought about it this way, it turned out that the other party's real target had been him all along. This was Old Gu's last thought. The next moment, boundless darkness attacked. Chapter 745. As the waves of the Hansui River gradually calmed down, Hansui City, which had been noisy for half a night, finally quieted down. Similar to the movies in the modern world, it was only at this time that the garrison cavalry, who had fled in panic before, tentatively appeared to deal with the aftermath. The Hansui River was a small problem. There were only a few dozen corpses lying on the ground. They just had to move them away and wash the blood off at the river. Yes, compared to the terrifying, destructive power of a void-level martial artist, only a few people died was indeed a small problem. The garrison cavalry who came to deal with it tremblingly obviously thought so too. After arriving at the scene, they all breathed a long sigh of relief. The more troublesome problem was the Mjolnir on the city wall. A void-level martial artist couldn't do anything about it. After all, their legs were grown on other people's bodies. However, the Mjolnir, which was originally placed on the wall as a decoration with a muzzle facing outside, openly fired a shot into the city. This was a big problem, and it also made the nobles in the city who boasted of their noble status feel particularly insecure. Needless to say, after a series of complaints and reprimands, the position of the general guarding the city would definitely be lost. In fact, it was already good enough that he could keep his life now. Of course, the high-level changes in the city had little to do with the incident, and no one with a brain cramp ordered search of the city. This was called Gods Fighting, Mortals Avoiding, Hansui River. Shortly after the battle ended, Tang Yin carried the middle-aged man who drank a lot of river water and looked like he was dying and came to the secret alchemy house. Before he knocked on the door, a figure had already opened the wooden door and rushed out, quickly jumping into Tang Yin's arms. Brother Tang, and oh, little Carol, don't worry, your brother is fine. After comforting her, Tang Yin spread out his hands and said helplessly to the koala bear hugging his neck, "Hurry up and come down. Your brother is now covered in water." This was inevitable. After all, he just climbed out of the Hansui River. It's okay. I knew my brother would win. Little Carol let go of her arms and waved her fist with a look of conviction. Ha, of course. Don't you know who your brother is? Tang Yin raised his head and laughed heartily when he heard these words. He looked like a villain intoxicated by success, and the cold demeanor of an expert he had displayed during the previous battle instantly disappeared. He turned his head again and saw Lena, who had just rushed out with little Carol and was now standing to the side with a smile while pinching her lapel. He nodded. This place wasn't affected, right? In fact, Ting In had already planned to force the void-grade cultivator into the water before the battle, because only in this way would he not pose any danger to Lena and the others in the city. I'm fine. Lena shook her head slightly and paused. She lowered her eyes and said in an unclear tone, "It's good that Mr. Arthur is fine." Tang did not mind the tone. He just nodded and looked at David and the others who were standing behind the door. He waved his hand and said, "Let's go inside first." On the other hand, little Carol looked at the relaxed and smiling Lena and couldn't help but blink in confusion. Strange, she was so nervous before. She couldn't wait to directly pray to the light god. How come she now looks like nothing happened? Stepping into the door, Tang In looked at David's absent-minded look and couldn't help but ask, "How is it? How many people did we lose this time?" "Huh? Boss, why do you ask?" David was startled when he heard the words, then spread his hands and said, "The plan was very successful. The 3 Earth-grade cultivators were directly hit by Mjolnir, and not even dregs were left. Although a few Gray Space brothers were injured in this operation, it wasn't a big problem." After a long breath, Tang In felt a lot more relaxed, and then he couldn't help but say angrily, "Damn. If that's the case, why are you still acting like a dead person? You scare me." Did I? Ha! David scratched his head and seemed to want to ask something, but after glancing around, he didn't ask. Needless to say, David wanted to ask about the Silver-Masked Man. He was sure that the Silver-Masked Man was Michaud. But thinking of Luke's advice before, Michaud's current situation was indeed not suitable for him to show up, so he restrained his temper and forced himself to swallow these words. "Tang In, Gray Space, you're the wanted criminal. You're from the Gray Code Army." At this time, the dying middle-aged man heard all the words and thought of something, and he immediately shouted excitedly, "Oh, you're quite smart." Tang In glanced at him with a smile, and then his face suddenly turned cold, and he slapped the back of the man's head. Bang! "Idiot! You don't even know the rules. Don't you know that some things can kill you?" Although the middle-aged man was caught before, he still had some hope of survival. But now, with Old Goo, the Earth-grade cultivators, the guards, and so on, all the people who came out with him this time were wiped out. He was really desperate. He shouted in horror, "You can't kill me. You don't dare to kill me. You absolutely don't dare." "Oh? Why?" Tang In bent down and took the water grass from the middle-aged man's face with interest. He straightened his collar and said, "You have to give me a reason why I don't dare to kill you." "Well, is it because you're from the Bounty Hunter Guild? Or is it because you're a lackey of the Temple of Light?" No, huh?" The middle-aged man kept shaking his head in denial, but when he heard the words Temple of Light, his body suddenly trembled. He subconsciously raised his head to look at Tang In, and his eyes were filled with shock. He opened his mouth, but his biggest secret had been revealed so casually that he couldn't even say a word now. After carefully observing the middle-aged man's every expression, Tang In couldn't help but reach out and touch his forehead with his hand. He then patted the man's shoulder, got up, and shook his head. F***CK. It's true. David and the others held their breaths when they heard this. They sucked in cold air from the corners of their mouths, and their expressions were complicated. A ray of light shone from the house not far away. It was hazy through the window, and the courtyard fell into complete silence. After his conversation with Redmond, Tang In had already begun to suspect that the Bounty Hunter Guild was secretly supported by the Temple of Light to eliminate discordant voices in the dark. But suspicions were just suspicions. Without any evidence, they couldn't be put on the table. But looking at the middle-aged man's expression now, Tang In undoubtedly confirmed his suspicions. To be honest, even though he had expected it, he still couldn't help but feel shocked. The dirty and bloody Bounty Hunter Guild, the holy and benevolent temple of light. Tiske, Teske. To make an inappropriate analogy, these two extreme forces were like fire and water. One was like a vagrant covered in abscesses and maggots crawling all over his body, while the other was like a pure little white flower that could only be watched from afar and not touched. These two should have had an inseparable relationship, and it even felt a little ridiculous to think about it. But now, they were secretly infatuated with each other, lovey-dovey. In an instant, those who knew about it felt terrible. It had to be said that life wasn't an imaginative novel, because life was often more unexpected and exciting than novels. Tang In, an outsider, felt that this matter was a little ridiculous. Needless to say, the local residents who had been influenced by the Temple of Light all their lives, namely David and the others, felt the same way. After a while, Tang In nodded. Okay, this is a little interesting. Very interesting. He shook his head and threw the middle-aged man to David. First, he asked Lena, is there an empty room here? I'll borrow it to do something. It'll be done soon. Lena came back to her senses and subconsciously pointed to the room on the left. There's a small warehouse there. Nodding, Tang and turned to look at David. 15 minutes. I want to know where the Bounty Hunter Guild's lair is. Be quiet. Taking a breath, David grabbed the middle-aged man and nodded heavily. No problem. After that, he directly picked a few people and walked to the room on the left. Clapping his hands, Tang In pointed to his still wet clothes and spread his hands innocently to Lena. Are there any clothes I can change into here? If not, a bonfire will do. There are clothes. I'll say I'm lucky. Tang In smiled and nodded. He still wanted to say something, but a horrifying howl suddenly sounded from the room on the left. But as soon as it was released, it seemed to be covered by someone's mouth. Only a slight moan could be heard. King told you to be quiet, shouted angrily. Then Tang In turned his head and looked at Lena, who was in a daze. He touched his nose and waved his hand to invite her. Then, take me to change clothes first? Let's go. Little Carol, you come too. There's nothing to see. This world is very messy. Chapter 746. Of course, the members of the Gray Space were not the best assassins, but their professional skills were excellent. For example, camouflage, tracking, and interrogation. For the middle-aged man to be able to become a high-ranking member of the Bounty Hunters, he naturally had his own strengths. He should have received special training to resist interrogation. However, this might not work in the hands of David and the others. Not to mention the methods and techniques. If they were forced, they could just use silver needles to force the answer out. However, doing so would not be worth it. After all, the middle-aged man was very useful, and they could not let him die so easily. However, being able to get the answer out did not mean that there would be a good result. The next afternoon, Shanghai City. A cold wind blew past, and a few yellowed leaves slowly fell from an unknown precious tree, adding to the melancholy of autumn. Maybe because of this environment, Tang In was feeling melancholy, especially when he looked at the empty manor in front of him. After a moment, he smacked his lips and praised. Amazing! He ran so fast. The information about Zachary, which was the true identity of the philanthropist of Shanghai City, was quickly revealed by the middle-aged man after he was tortured last night. Tang In did not delay and brought the members of the Gray Space for a long-distance raid. In just half a night, they directly killed their way over. However, who would have thought that this place was empty? From the end of the battle to the departure, Tang In thought that he did not waste any time, which meant that even if the enemy had a Void Realm warrior to pass on the message, they could not be ahead of Tang In. However, they were empty-handed. Obviously, when the negotiation team came to Hanshui City, they chose to leave for safety reasons. As expected, the news that Harry brought back was that Zachary had left the city with a merchant group 4 days ago. The reason was to do a big business. Did he say the destination? No. Nodding his head, Tang In sighed and waved his hand, informed the secret organization in the city to spread the news of Zachary. As long as he is still in the north, Find him even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground. Yes. After giving the order, Tang In stroked his chin, but his expression was not anxious. Fortunately, I hit my trump card. Otherwise, if you escaped, where would I put my face? David, when you go back, keep an eye on that old man for me. You can give him some pressure. I don't believe that he won't look for the organization. The so-called old fellow was naturally the brown-clothed old man that had come to Coldwater City with the middle-aged man. Tang In knew that the other party did not come to the Cold River to participate in the negotiations last night. However, he did not take advantage of this opportunity to make a move. He was afraid that this situation would occur. Who would have thought that it would really come in handy now? Okay, David nodded and said hesitantly, then should we go back now? In any case, we've come such a long way. It would be such a waste to go back without doing anything. Tang In smiled and waved his hand. He turned and left the manor. Let's go. I remember that there is a Yatong Chamber of Commerce in this city. Send someone to find it later. Oh, and find an auction house. Auction house. David scratched his head. Why are you looking for this? Nonsense, of course it's to buy something. Tang In squinted his long and narrow eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a mysterious smile. To buy something that is destined to shock the entire continent. As previously mentioned, Shanghai City was the most developed city in the northern part brand. As such, the Yatong Chamber of Commerce naturally had to set up a branch here. After finding the location, Tang In quickly left after a short while. He bought some things, found a random hotel room, and fiddled with something. He only came out in the evening, dusk. The auction house in the city. As everyone knew, any shop that could be set up in a prime location in the city would not be weak in terms of quality, scale, and background. The auction house in front of them was the same. There was no need to elaborate on the scale and decorations. One only needed to know how luxurious it was. As for the background on the surface, it was a few big nobles in the city. However, for a chain auction house like this, their background would not be so simple. Rumors said that they were related to some of the big shots in the brand. However, this was not important. One only needed to know that in this city, no matter how arrogant a big gang was, they would not dare to cause trouble here. However, although the auction house was big, the auction today was not big. There were only about 100 people participating. Of course, this did not mean that the business of the auction house was bad. In fact, it involved the operation of the auction house. Normally, the auction house was open every day, but the items being auctioned were not of high quality. Only when the auction house gathered many rare treasures and held some large-scale events would more people come to participate. At this time, the auction was about to start. 2 nouveau riches, who were decked out in gold and silver and exuded the stench of money, strutted into the hallway. In truth, taste was something that could not be seen and could not be touched. Sometimes, it had nothing to do with wealth. However, no matter what, the 2 of them had "I'm rich" written all over their faces. One could not see any taste from the looks of disdain that the passers-by gave them. However, the 2 of them did not feel ashamed. Instead, they felt proud and mocked the passers-by. This is the most luxurious auction house in Shanghai City. It seems like it is only SOSO. That's right. Where are those hanging on the wall? They're so colorful, like a plate of rotten tomatoes. Isn't it good to hang a big golden rat? It can even attract money. Why not a big golden bull? A golden bull is so domineering. Oh, that's true. While walking ostentatiously through the streets, the 2 nouveau riches commented on the decorations in the corridors. Finally, both of you, please be careful with your words. A slightly angry voice resonated. A middle-aged man who seemed to be an aristocrat who was following behind the 2 quickly caught up and pointed at the painting on the wall that was labeled as Rotten Tomato. He said in a deep voice, "This is Master Mark Siemens' most classic work. It depicts the starry sky, and it's magnificent." Oh, my what, man? The burly nouveau riche was startled when he heard those words. The narrow-eyed nouveau riche next to him waved his hand disapprovingly and said, "Who cares about man? Just tell me how much this thing is worth. 1,000 gold? or 2,000 gold. 2,000 gold? You. The middle-aged noble was furious when he heard those words. His face flushed red as he pointed at the painting. This is art. This is a priceless treasure. You can't use money to measure it. Do you understand? Priceless treasure? Doesn't that mean it has no value? The burly nouveau riche shook his head in disdain. The gold chain on his neck shook. No, no. If it is not worth anything, I wouldn't want it even if you gave it to me for free. You. Opening his mouth, the middle-aged noble was clearly stupefied by Joshua's words. He could not even speak properly. He panted heavily and roared angrily. Who said it is not worth anything? It is worth a city. Oh, so expensive? The narrow-eyed nouveau riche seemed to be shocked. His oily face was filled with disbelief. Before the middle-aged noble could show a gratified expression of, "You finally know the true value of this painting," the narrow-eyed nouveau riche patted him on the shoulder and said solemnly, "I say, brother, have you been deceived? This thing that can't be eaten, drunk, and looks like an eyesore is worth a city? Sigh, looks like you've been deceived. Take care of yourself." Shaking their heads, the two nouveau riche left these well-meaning words of persuasion and left. Only the middle-aged noble was left standing there like a statue with a blank expression. When they walked into the auction hall, the auctioneer on the stage had already begun to give a speech to warm up the atmosphere. No one noticed the arrival of the two nouveau riche. After finding a seat and sitting down, the burly nouveau riche looked around and whispered, "Boss, I still don't understand. This is something that we made. Why do we have to raise the price here to get it back? Isn't this an unnecessary move?" The narrow-eyed nouveau riche smiled and shook his head. His already thin eyes were almost narrowed into slits. "Ha, this is not an unnecessary move. It is to build momentum. This is troublesome to talk about. You will understand in the future." Oh, the burly nouveau riche scratched his head and did not ask any more questions. Then he seemed to have thought of something and grinned. It feels good to pretend to be rich. That guy was just trying to scare us. He said it was worth a city, and we should have bought all the paintings in the corridor and thrown them at his face. Let's see who has more money. Buy all of them. The narrow-eyed nouveau riche was shocked when he heard this. He turned his head and looked at the person beside him in a daze. After a while, he raised his thumb and sighed. "You're awesome. You're the real rich one." Chapter 747. P.S. Same old rules. 1 chapter per content. Civet cats are such straightforward cats. Carrot. Needless to say, the narrow-eyed nouveau riche was naturally Tang in. As for the burly one, it was David. Just as they were talking, precious and rare items were placed on the stage one after another. The bidding voices rose and fell, and the auction proceeded in an orderly manner. As mentioned earlier, today's auction was only a small-scale one. Although most of the items were not cheap, they were not that valuable. For example, jewelry, weapons, armor, and some ornamental coral, etc. Originally, according to the established process, this small-scale auction went by peacefully until the 4th item was placed on the stage. This was a multicolored bracelet made of agate, coral beads, crystal diamonds, and so on. Under the illumination of the light, it looked like a luxurious bracelet. The auctioneer stood at the side and introduced it with all his might. This bracelet was made by a mysterious master craftsman. It's called the tear of the sea goddess. The materials used to make it are, as the saying goes, there was no seller who did not say that his melon was sweet. This sentence was most applicable to auctioneers. If an item that was good came from their mouth, it would at least be 3 times better. In fact, as long as one carefully analyzed their words, one would be able to find some clues. For example, if this bracelet was really made by a master craftsman, then the auctioneer would definitely mention the master's name when promoting it. This was because it would add a lot of color to the auction item and could be sold for a good price. Now, because the maker was not famous, it was a little dull to mention his name. Therefore, the title of the mysterious master craftsman was used to attract attention. As for the tear of the sea goddess, this name instantly gave off a feeling of grandeur. Moreover, it was full of literary and tragic feelings. Those with rich imagination could even think of a sad story. It was really a must-kill treasure for sentimental aristocratic women who did not have to worry about food and clothing. In fact, it was only because there were agate, coral, and other marine minerals in it that it was related. However, no matter what the secret behind it was, as the auctioneer continued to introduce it, the women in the venue looked at the bracelet that looked good. Their eyes were full of splendor, and they were very interested. However, at this moment, a rough laugh suddenly interrupted the auctioneer's chatter. Haha, I like this thing. It looks valuable. It's not like those bottles and jars. I'll pay 2,500 gold. Whoosh! As soon as he finished speaking, the auction hall was instantly in an uproar. Most of the people sitting at the front turned around to look, and the expression in their eyes wasn't shock, but ridicule, as if they were looking at a joke. Although this bracelet was beautiful, it was only beautiful. It was worth at most 800 gold coins. Even if someone tried to raise the price, it would only be worth 1,000 gold coins at most. Now, however, someone had directly bid 2,500 gold coins. If this wasn't foolishness, then what was? However, the burly nouveau riche who was surrounded by onlookers did not feel that he was being looked down upon at all. Instead, he looked around proudly, like a villain who was intoxicated by success. Even a narrow-eyed nouveau riche waved his hand disdainfully. What's the point of asking for that small change? You're too stingy. Just ask for 3,000 gold. The entire venue fell silent. Everyone was speechless. If their gazes were filled with disdain and ridicule before, then now there was pity in their gazes. How stupid was he? Some of the women didn't think too much about it, but they looked very dissatisfied. They knew in their hearts that this bracelet wasn't worth that much money. Therefore, no matter how much they liked it, the men beside them wouldn't bid for it. The only person who was happy was the auctioneer. At first, he was startled, but then he was overjoyed. He quickly asked if anyone wanted to raise the price, and simply decided to announce that the bracelet belonged to the narrow-eyed nouveau riche. Huh! With a loud laugh, the narrow-eyed nouveau riche stood up and casually grabbed a large amount of gold notes and was about to go on stage to collect the bracelet. Huh! Ha! Seeing this situation, everyone in the venue was stunned at first, but then they couldn't help but cover their mouths and laugh. The atmosphere in the venue was joyous. However, the auctioneer looked a little embarrassed and quickly went down the stage to explain. The auction hall was not a shop. Here, one didn't have to pay in person. After the auction, there would be service staff to lead the way backstage, where one could pay and collect the item. Of course, if the buyer insisted, the transaction could be done immediately, but the location was not in the auction hall. After all, it wasn't very classy to ask for change in person. After making a mistake, the narrow-eyed nouveau riche didn't feel ashamed. He waved his hand and muttered that this high-end auction hall wasn't as convenient as a small shop. His words were full of contempt. However, at this time, the surrounding people didn't have the mood to continue laughing at him. To be precise, they didn't even want to look at him. This F***king idiot, just looking at him made them feel like their IQ was being lowered. After the farce, the auction continued. Most of the items being auctioned were paintings and exquisite ceramics. These kinds of abstract works of art that required a discerning eye to appreciate. The two nouveau riche had no interest in bidding. Don't ask for change. Ahem, boss, your disguise is simply amazing. David came closer and expressed his sincere admiration for Tang Un's vivid image of the nouveau riche, and praised him in a low voice. It's nothing, you're not bad yourself. Tang In patted David's shoulder, and his face was full of admiration. They say that life is like a play, and it's all about acting. But it can't stop your acting from being like life, and it's all about emotions. I have high hopes for you. Continue acting as yourself. After a pause, he suddenly raised his voice, pointed at the auction item below, and suddenly said, "Second brother, this thing sounds good. You have so many women. Do you want to buy it back?" David was startled when he heard this. He looked over and realized that the item being auctioned was a pill. After listening to the vague introduction of the auctioneer, He realized that it was a medicine that could greatly enhance a man's ability in that area. To be honest, although this thing was a bit unpresentable, it was definitely a hot commodity. After all, there were too many aristocrats who were old in appearance, but young in heart. Big brother, don't joke around. David's face suddenly darkened when he heard this. He bent his arms and straightened his back, his muscles bulging like old trees, and complained loudly, "Look, my shoulders can run a horse, no matter how many women I have. It's not a problem. This thing should be left for those useless softies." F***CK. Several old aristocrats who were raising their paddles to bid suddenly froze when they heard this. Their old faces flushed red, and they almost suffocated. This attack was too broad. Originally, everyone had a tacit understanding about this matter, and, at most, they would just show a you-know-what-I-mean smile on their faces. After all, the matters between men and women were commonplace in the aristocratic class, and it was also considered culture. But after David made it so clear, who would be willing to risk the danger of being seen as a softie and continue bidding? Wasn't that just asking to be slapped in the face? It was under this strange atmosphere that the auctioneer smiled bitterly as he watched the medicine being bought at a very low price. The last person who called out the price didn't have the joy of getting a bargain, but looked at David as if he was going to go berserk and kill him. The auctioneer saw that the atmosphere was stiff and didn't have time to feel distressed. He hurriedly put the next auction item on the stage. This was a book with a dark color and 4 broken corners. The material seemed to be the skin of some magical beast, and at a glance, it had a sense of vicissitudes of history. This is a book that adventurers found in the ruins of some ancient ruins. Although the words inside are somewhat obscure, according to the evaluation of professional appraisers, this book has at least 1,000 years of history. It should be a mysterious secret book of Qi cultivation methods. This introduction successfully aroused the interest of the people present. Ancient things were originally very valuable, and this was likely to be a secret book of cultivation methods. Its value was even more difficult to estimate, but it was only a little bit of interest. After all, if this was really an amazing secret book, the auction house wouldn't put it up for auction at all, let alone in such a small auction. Obviously, the degree of obscurity mentioned by the auctioneer was definitely not just a little bit. As for the secret book of cultivation methods, it was more likely to be just a gimmick. The truth was more or less the same. After the auction house received this ancient book, they immediately invited the relevant experts to decipher and translate it. But no matter how those experts searched through all the ancient books, they couldn't find any strange words similar to this book. In the end, they could only define it as the scribbles of a child in ancient times. In fact, it was normal that they couldn't decipher it, because even the author himself didn't know what it meant. But no one in the auction house noticed that the 2 nouveaux riches unconsciously straightened their bodies after seeing this book. The narrow-eyed nouveau riche glanced at a certain part of the auction house and nodded slightly. The starting price is 500 gold coins. The bidding starts now. I'll bid 500, 600, 650 gold coins. There were very few bidders, and the price was only rising slowly. This was expected. No one was a fool. It was impossible for a book that they didn't know to be sold at a high price. Those who bid were only buying it because this book was a rare ancient thing. They just wanted to collect it as a curiosity. But at this moment, the loud voices of the 2 nouveaux riches rang in everyone's ears again. "Big brother, should we buy this thing? It's obviously worthless at first glance. Why should we buy? Oh wait, let me think." The narrow-eyed nouveau riche picked at the corner of his mouth, and his expression changed. Then, as if he had thought of something, he suddenly hammered his palm. "Buy. We have to buy it. Let's see who dares to say that we're uncultured in the future." "All right. Where did we increase the price just now?" "Sigh, forget it. 3,000. I'll bid 3,000 gold coins." F***CK. These 2 idiots are at it again. The corners of everyone's mouth twitched a few times. They silently cursed and were too lazy to continue mocking them. Once the price of 3,000 gold coins was raised, the people who had bid earlier naturally didn't have the intention to continue increasing the price. It wasn't that they didn't have the money. It was just that they wanted to compete with these nouveaux riches. They couldn't afford to lose face. Seeing this, the auctioneer on the stage was delighted. He thought that he had at least earned back the money he had spent on the medicine. He raised the wooden hammer and symbolically asked, "This, sir, has bid 3,000 gold coins. Is there anyone who wants to bid higher? If there isn't, 5,000 gold coins." The wooden hammer fell. "Then this ancient book belongs to—" The auctioneer staggered and raised his head in astonishment. Fortunately, he didn't smash the wooden hammer on himself. Everyone in the auction house was also surprised when they heard this. They subconsciously looked back and saw a fat, middle-aged man dressed like a merchant calmly raising his card to bid in the corner. What the F***ck? The burly nouveau riche was furious when he heard this. He looked at the other party provocatively and shouted loudly, 8,000. I'll F***king bid 8,000 gold coins. 10,000. You F***king. 50,000. 100,000. 150,000. 200,000. In a short breath, the price soared. The auction house was suddenly in an uproar. Exclamations rose and fell one after another. The auctioneer on the stage trembled with excitement and clenched his fists. Damn, it's finally here. I've been waiting for this for so long. This is the rhythm of an auction. When the price rose to 500,000, the burly nouveau riche paused and glared fiercely at the other party. He stood up and pointed his finger in the air and shouted word by word, 1,010,000. King bid 1 million. F***ck. You want to compete with me in terms of wealth? You're still too young. Well, the atmosphere in the auction house began to stir. Although most of the people present were not poor, they couldn't help but feel dizzy when they heard this enormous number. What did 1 million gold coins mean? Even a small city's annual tax revenue wouldn't be that much. But now it was just to buy an inexplicable book. Sure enough, he was a fool with a lot of money. After calming down, the crowd couldn't help but reveal a gloating smile. Obviously, this vulgar nouveau riche was now holding a grudge. When the time came, he might regret it. His IQ was worrying. As for the chubby merchant, in the eyes of the crowd, he probably couldn't stand these two nouveau riche and deliberately raised the price to trick them. The difference in IQ was obvious. But was this really the case? Amidst the clamor, the chubby merchant frowned and looked at the ancient book on the stage. He then turned his head and looked deeply at the burly nouveau riche. His expression didn't change as he calmly said, 2 million. As soon as the words fell, the auction house fell into a dead silence. Only the sound of gulping could be heard. Too much, too much. Some people unconsciously shook their heads. They thought to themselves that this was not the right way to raise the price. If you scare the other party away, wouldn't you be eating the bitter fruit? However, most of the quick-witted people frowned. Such a large amount of 2 million, it was impossible to raise the price. Looking at the calm temperament of the chubby merchant, he didn't seem like a person who would get angry easily. So, there was only one possibility. This auction item was really worth 2 million. Realizing this, their burning gazes instantly converged on the ancient book. What kind of content was recorded in this book? How could it be worth so much? Could it really be a secret manual of mental cultivation? But what kind of realm could a secret manual of mental cultivation be practiced to be worthy of 2 million? The bewildered crowd kept guessing and didn't notice that the corner of the narrow-eyed nouveau riche's mouth was slightly raised. Hee success. Tang and chuckled in his heart. He leaned back on the wooden chair with a relaxed expression. This so-called ancient secret manual was actually an arrangement made by Tang In to deceive others in order to release the circulation channel of his dou qi. After the old butler systematic arrangement, Tang In now had several complete channels to increase his dou qi without any side effects. However, this news couldn't be spread out. Otherwise, no matter how strong Tang In was, he would be eaten up until not even his bones would be left. In this way, he could only use this contrast to use money to create a publicity effect. Just like what was said before, to create momentum. A book was actually sold for millions of gold coins. Wouldn't everyone want to know such explosive news? Then, they would keep guessing what the content of this book was. When everyone's attention shifted to this ancient secret manual, Tang and could release the flawed dough cheese circulation channel with peace of mind. Of course, after the event, he would spread some rumors, such as the secret manual being incomplete. First, he would clean up the consequences of the side effects. While Tang and was secretly scheming, David and the chubby merchant, Harry, had joined forces to raise the price to 4 million. At this time, not to mention the onlookers, even the auctioneer was dumbfounded. A total of 4 million, and it seemed that there was no upper limit. Just to snatch this book that was probably the scribbles of an ancient child? Were the two of them crazy, or was he crazy? Or was the world collectively convulsing? Huff, huff. Pulling the necklace that seemed to be a little tight around his neck, David was obviously in character. He wiped the sweat on his forehead and shouted hoarsely, 4,500,000. F*CKU. I'll bid 4,500,000 gold coins. Increase continued to increase. Everyone looked at the chubby merchant and silently said in their hearts. They were a little numb after being led around by him. It seemed that 4,500,000 gold coins wasn't a lot. Harry's acting was also very good. He acted out his determined and helpless expression vividly. He slowly got up, looked at David expressionlessly, and said stiffly, 5 million. See, he really increased the price. Everyone collectively turned back to look at the burly nouveau riche. Hearing this, the nouveau riche suddenly jumped up and opened his mouth to scold. But at this time, the narrow-eyed nouveau riche beside him grabbed him tightly and wiped the sweat on his forehead. Forget it, second brother. We are all people of status. Don't lower yourself to the same level as this madman. After a pause, he looked at the chubby merchant and pretended to be strong, but he was somewhat lacking in confidence. Hey, it's not that we are afraid of you. We have a lot of gold coins, but we didn't bring all of them with us today. Ahem. Anyway, today we will give you face and let you have this book. After that, he pulled the burly nouveau riche and walked quickly to the exit of the auction house. Is this admitting defeat? Everyone present felt that they were discerning people. Naturally, they didn't believe the other party's words such as didn't bring the gold coins with us and give you face. Seeing the two arrogant and despotic nouveau riche run away with their tails between their legs. Although they didn't do it, they still felt as if they had drunk iced cold water on a hot summer day. How could the word cool describe it? Their previously depressed thoughts were instantly cleared up. Go back, you two pretentious country bumpkins. Aren't we competing with more money? Why aren't we competing? Continue, Walking in a hurry, Tang glanced back and a sarcastic smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Does it feel good to be slapped in the face? Does it feel good to see it? Can't you wait to tell others what happened here? Publicize it. Publicize it for me as much as you want, although I won't pay you a single copper coin for advertising. Chapter 748. After Tang, and David left the auction house, Harry naturally left as well. However, they didn't leave the auction house. Instead, they followed the staff backstage to pay and retrieve their items. The backstage design of the auction house was quite user-friendly. It was divided into different cubicles. This was probably to avoid the awkward scene of the two parties who were bidding desperately, just now meeting each other. However, what they didn't know was that Tang didn't care about this at all. If they met, he would even argue with Harry, showing the shameless spirit of losing but not losing face. Of course, it was also to add some gossip for those who wanted to see a joke. After all, they still had to rely on their mouths to spread the news. Tang paid 3,000 gold coins and took back the bejeweled bracelet, which was the only thing they had bought for the night. In fact, Twain only had a total of 10,000 gold coins on him. The gold notes that he had grabbed earlier were all of small denominations. It was just for show. Tang obviously knew that he couldn't pay directly at the auction house. As for the 5 million that Harry paid, it was real gold notes. This was the premise to ensure that tonight's plan could be carried out smoothly. It was also all the liquid funds of the Tang Chamber of Commerce in the city. Immediately after, Harry took the ancient book and left. Tang In disguised himself as the book's owner, the adventurer, and came to collect the money from the auction. This money still had to be returned to the Tang Chamber of Commerce in the city. After all, if such a large chamber of commerce didn't have any liquid funds, it would be a big problem. The auction house didn't play any tricks on this. Although 5 million gold coins was a lot, it wasn't worth mentioning compared to the reputation of this chain auction house that made a lot of money every day. Moreover, they also gained a lot of benefits. The rule of collecting 5% of the total auction price allowed them to get a total of 250,000 gold coins. At this point, this deliberately planned operation came to a perfect end. In summary, it was a 5 million promotion, a 250,000 advertising fee, and then lit the fuse that would shake the continent in the future. No matter how he thought about it, Tang In felt that he had made a big profit this time. Of course, not everyone thought the same way. After settling this matter, Tang In brought the members of the Gray Space and left Shanghai City on the same day. Soon after, the news of what happened in the auction house began to spread. Just as Tang In had expected, the people present at that time did not even wait for the auction to end. They could not wait to leave the auction house to share this happy, face-slapping plot with their friends and relatives. It had to be said that this story was quite fascinating, especially after the details were dug out. Did he look down on Master Mark-Simon, saying that the classic painting of Starry Sky was a rotten tomato? 3,000 gold coins for a bracelet worth a few hundred gold coins? Asking for 5 million gold coins for this inexplicable book on fighting aura? Furthermore, he had been slapped in the face and admitted defeat in front of everyone. Starting, carrying, transferring, and reuniting, there was nothing lacking. At this point, a delightful story was born. At the start, this story quickly spread among the noble circles of Shanghai City. Everyone had the mentality of wanting to see something ugly. Naturally, most people's attitude was to mock them. After all, it was not strange for there to be two idiotic nouveau riche. However, it was rare for them to reach the level of Tang, Un, and David. Of course, there were also people who talked about the ancient book. After all, it was worth 5 million, so one did not need to think to know that the book was not normal. It was funny, but also suspenseful. Following this heated discussion, this delightful story quickly spread to the entire city. Following which, this matter reached a small climax after it was published in the Shanghai City newspaper, spreading to the entire north at a shocking speed. What? Exaggerated? No. One must know that the entertainment life in the other world was poor. Even the noble class could not do anything new. A rumor of a noble lady cheating could cause the entire city to talk about it. As such, one did not even need to talk about this delightful, face-slapping plot. Everyone spread the news and enjoyed the joy of watching a joke. Of course, to be able to spread so quickly, there was a huge hand behind the scenes. That was the secret organization that received orders from Tang Un. Speaking of which, they did not do much. They only added fuel to the fire. However, as people who were born in the field of publicity, they did push the matter to the point. For example, quickly reporting this matter to the city publicity office and publishing it on the next day's newspaper was their doing. Moreover, this was only a part of the publicity plan. First, they wanted to attract the attention of the public. After the situation cooled down, they would release some rumors about the authenticity of the broken secret manual. Finally, they would find 2 corpses that were similar to the nouveau riche's bodies. Moreover, they looked like they were murdered. Needless to say, as long as the 2 nouveau riche died, everyone would turn their attention to the chubby merchant and think that he was taking revenge. At this point, the main point was that people would wonder why he chose to take revenge. Was it because he paid too much? Or was it because he wanted to hide something but had no choice but to magnify it? It did not matter. In this world, there were always many people who called themselves smart. As long as they gave some vague hints, they would be able to give a seemingly convincing answer. At that time, with a whole set of plans, the topic of discussion would change from the tout nouveau riche to the ancient secret manual. And this was also Tang Un's true goal. It was true that people's hearts were unpredictable. However, from another point of view, this sentence also revealed that people's hearts were changeable and easily influenced by various subjective and objective factors. For example, the deception of authority, the self-suggestion of conformity, of course. This was something that would happen later. It had nothing to do with the current Tang Un. In fact, he had now returned to Hanshui City. The brown-clothed old man had left Hanshui City a long time ago, and his whereabouts were also under the surveillance of the members of the Gray Space. However, he was now hiding in the Bounty Hunter Guild in a small city and did not make any big movements. This was naturally a situation that Tang Un did not want to see. However, this matter really could not be rushed. After all, he could not force the other party to lead the way. Of course, Tang Un also had a way to deal with this. That was to get David and the others to pretend that they did not intend to sweep through the Bounty Hunter Guild. Then, from time to time, he would put pressure on the other party and force him to take the initiative to lead the way. This was a patient job, just like casting a net to catch fish. It always took some time to reap the harvest. That was why Tang Un thought that he could have a good rest after this battle. However, the moment he returned to the contact point of the secret organization in Hanshui City, before he could even sit down to rest, a figure filled with dissatisfaction and anger rushed in front of him. "Mr. Tang Un, I've been following you for an entire week. However, in this period of time, apart from running around aimlessly, you have not done anything that we agreed on. I would like to ask, where is the promise you made before? Did I not see it clearly? Or do you think that we only need to sit here and the evil forces of the Temple of Light will be purified and punished?" Tang Un was a little stunned by this series of questions. He stared blankly at the angry Redmond in front of him and subconsciously rubbed his nose. "Promise? What promise?" "You." Redmond was speechless when he heard this, his body trembling slightly. Fortunately, Tang Un finally reacted at this moment. He pulled Redmond to sit down and handed him a cup of tea to gag him. Then, he rubbed his forehead, feeling a little troubled. Tang Un did make a promise before that he would use the ugly inside story provided by Redmond to attack the Temple of Light. However, now that everything had come together and the embryonic form of the assassin organization had not been formed, Tang Un naturally chose to put this matter aside. After comforting Redmond for a while, Tang Un realized that it did not have much of an effect. Tang Un thought for a while and suddenly had an idea. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "I remember that your father has an enemy, that bishop. What's his name again?" "Vitega, the former bishop of the Tsinghua City Church," Redmond said without hesitation. "Yes, that's the guy. Well, do you know where he is now?" He shook his head. "He left Tsinghua City more than 10 years ago. I only know that he was promoted, but I don't know his exact location." "Well, why are you asking this?" "It's okay if you don't know. It's easy to find out if you know his name." Tang Un nodded and said, "How about this? I'll help you avenge your father's death first. How about that?" Redmond frowned. "Mr. Tang Un, as I said, revenge is secondary. Restoring the pure faith of the Temple of Light is the most important. This is also my father's last wish." "I know, but this doesn't conflict, does it?" Tang Un spread out his palms. "That Vi. Oh, Vitega is a representative of the evil forces of the Temple of Light. We will expose his crimes to the public and let him get the punishment he deserves. This is also purifying the faith, isn't it?" Redmond was startled when he heard this. He pondered for a while and could not help but slowly nod in agreement, but his expression was still a little reluctant. "But the effect is too small." "Ha, that's it then." Tang Un hurriedly waved his hand to interrupt Redmond's words and shouted to the door, "2 men, go and investigate a clergyman called Vitega." He paused, turned to Redmond, and said solemnly, "Believe me, Mr. Redmond, I'm a professional. There are many ways to take revenge, and what I'll give you is not only the pleasure of revenge, but also a considerable shock to the Temple of Light." Redmond was startled. "Well, I'll wait and see. Don't worry. Men, hurry up and send Mr. Redmond to rest." After much persuasion, Tang In finally managed to send the hot-blooded Raymond out of the door. Then, he heaved a sigh of relief and sat back in his chair. He held his forehead and smiled bitterly. I was born to be a laborer. Chapter 749. It was not difficult to investigate Whittaker. He had a name and a background, so it was not difficult to collect information on him. Indeed, as Redmond had said, Whittaker had been promoted several times in the past 10 years. He was now the deputy chief of the Northern Inquisition of the Temple of Light. To be honest, Tengen felt that Redmond's father's death was not unjust. Although he had not met Whittaker face to face, he could tell from his beautiful resume that Whittaker was definitely a scheming, ambitious, and most importantly, a black-hearted guy. Redmond's father had encountered such a ruthless character, so it was reasonable for him to die an unjust death. Of course, collecting information on Whittaker did not mean that he would immediately seek revenge. Tang and was still clear about the importance of this matter. Although he would have to provoke the Temple of Light sooner or later, the premise was that he had to have something to rely on. Now that the Bounty Hunter Guild had not been settled and the assassin organization had not been established, Tang naturally did not want to be distracted. However, reality often did not go as planned. A few days later, the depressed Tang still brought Redmond and a few other members of the Gray Space to find Whittaker. It could not be helped. David had put a lot of pressure on him, but the old man in brown did not move. He would rather die than look for an organization. This really made Tang In, who was waiting, feel helpless. 3 days later, on a hill outside a remote town in the north. It was noon, and the wind was gentle and the sun was bright. He's not here yet. Mr. Tang In, are you sure that vicious man will pass by here today? Is the information wrong? Redmond walked up and down the hill anxiously, stopping to ask from time to time. He seemed to be very impatient. Don't worry. Can't you find a place to lie down first? Even if you don't feel dizzy walking around. I feel dizzy just by looking at you. Tang In, who was lying on the slope with a grass stem in his mouth and squinting his eyes, shrugged helplessly. Besides, didn't you say that you don't care about revenge? Why are you so anxious now? Pausing his steps, Redmond paused for a moment before finding a place to sit down. He lowered his head and muttered, "In the past, I also thought that I wasn't in a hurry. But for some reason, when I think about seeing that hypocritical, disgusting old face that still hasn't closed his eyes, I feel very unhappy. It's like there's a fire burning in my heart." F***CK. Finally, there's a hint of humanity in him. It's not easy. Twain sighed inwardly. He got up halfway and patted him on the shoulder. Don't think too much about it. This is normal. After all, he's your father's murderer. Paused for a while. He touched his nose and said, "But let me say this first. I won't attack Vitega this time. Sorry, I have a complete plan. I can't kill him immediately." That would be letting him off too easily. Redmond couldn't help but ask, "What plan?" "It's a secret for now." The corner of Tang Un's mouth raised slightly, revealing a rather mysterious smile. "Didn't you say you were Puritan? This time I'll give you a surprise. I just hope that you won't be too surprised." "Ha!" Redmond frowned. Obviously, he couldn't stand Tang Un's bad taste. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the top of the mountain. "Boss, the target has appeared." Tang In and Redmond looked at each other, turned around, and ran toward the top of the mountain. From their vantage point, the mountain road twisted and turned like a dancing white snake. About 3 kilometers away, on the mountain road, there were faint black shadows. It was impossible to see anything with the naked eye. However, Tang In was well prepared this time. He took the binoculars from the members of the Gray Space and put them on his narrowed eyes. His field of vision was magnified several times, and the dots of black shadows from before became a convoy. Although he still could not see them clearly, he could still recognize the holy armor that shone brightly under the sun. Tang In nodded and handed the binoculars to Redmond. He chuckled and said, "Come and take a look. Is that Vitega? It seems that he has done a lot of bad things. He even brought so many guards on a trip." Vitega was the deputy chief judge of the Northern Inquisition of the Temple of Light. His status was not low. This trip was not for sightseeing, at least not on the surface. According to the intelligence, Vitega's purpose this time was to secretly investigate the character and merits of the clergy in each church. To put it simply, he was going incognito. Of course, it was basically just an empty statement to say that he could make such a big fuss while traveling incognito. According to Raymond's explanation, he was here to reap some benefits and also to travel at public expense. Humph, 2 brigades of Holy Light Knights. It's definitely that cowardly guy. Redmond snorted and put down the binoculars with a face full of anger. He turned his head and said, "They're here. What's the plan?" "Be patient, Mr. Redmond." Tang and looked up at the sky and then turned to look at the town on the left side of the hill. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Only with enough patience can you taste the greater pleasure of success." Vitega was in a good mood recently. As for the reason, it was simple. That was, he had gained a lot from his investigation. This was normal because, to some extent, the current situation of the Temple of Light was just as Redmond said. It was rotten to the core. The clergy no longer thought about self-cultivation and spreading the faith. Instead, they began to focus on the wallets and beauty of the believers. Vitega was one of them. Even he didn't deny it. It was precisely because of this that he was very clear about the dirty operations of the church. It could be said that if he wanted to investigate, a lot of problematic clergy should be sent to the Inquisition. But of course, he wouldn't investigate. If he wanted to investigate, he would investigate those with no background. And those with means and background naturally got the news early on. So wherever he went, there would be people secretly sending filial valuables to him. Mutual understanding, good for you, good for me, good for everyone. This was the way to make money. As for why he had gained a lot, he was in a good mood. That was because Vitega knew that this should be the last time he came out to reap benefits. Around the end of the year, his position as the vice president of the Inquisition would be removed. He would no longer have any real power and could be considered to have officially retired. This treatment was not because of his age. Of course, vigor was not young. Even if his heart was not old, his lower body, which used to rely on pills to raise his head, was telling him that he had to admit that he was old. But the key reason why he retired this time was the problem of his background. Vitega was born in an ordinary family. He could climb to his current position with his own ability, but this was also the limit he could reach. This limit could not be crossed by playing tricks and currying favor with the big shots. Being born in a low family meant that he started late, and it also meant that he did not have the support of a big force behind him. So unless there was a particularly heaven-defying accident, he would never be able to compete with the strong competitors. So I forget it. Thinking of this, Vitega shook his head and sighed. He looked at his pair of hands that had a few age spots and withered yellow skin and muttered to himself, "That's it. I'll make one more profit and then find a southern city to enjoy my old age." "Sir," just when Vitega was still feeling dejected, the slowly moving carriage suddenly stopped, and then a voice came through the window. "There are dozens of civilians in front of us blocking the road. They said that most of the people in their town have been vomiting and diarrhea since this morning. It seems that they have contracted some low-level plague. They want to ask you to purify them." Vitega frowned and muttered in dissatisfaction, "Damn it, how did they know our whereabouts? It's so troublesome." Naturally, there was no profit to be made in a small town, so Vitega, who wanted to rush to the next city, did not want to deal with this matter. But now his convoy was blocked by the people. If he did not go and check it out, it would be even more troublesome if this matter was leaked. After thinking about it, he waved his hand helplessly. "Got it, then let's go check it out." After a pause, a faint sarcastic smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He just treat it as a real good deed before retirement. The convoy turned and headed to the town along the fork in the road amidst the cheers. Vitega, of course, did not know what this choice would bring. Otherwise, it would be hard to say if he would still be kind. Chapter 750. The town was located in a remote area. Although it was not small and had a large population, there were no decent buildings in sight. Upon entering the town, the first thing they felt was the gloomy atmosphere. There were almost no pedestrians on the streets, but there were many pale civilians lying in front of the roadside doors. They looked weak and on the verge of death. But in the next moment, these people suddenly jumped up in high spirits, holding their stomachs as they rushed to their own feces pits. They looked really miserable. "Welcome, sir." The convoy quickly drove into the town square, but the moment Victor opened the door to get off, his nose twitched and his expression was disgusted. Asterisk pa. Asterisk the door was closed again, and the mayor who came to greet them was immediately shut out. Damn it, what the hell is this place? Victor covered the white silk cloth and kept fanning his hands in front of his nose, muttering curses. As mentioned before, the people in the town were vomiting and having diarrhea. Although this situation was not fatal, one could imagine the smell in the town. Victor used the excuse that he was not feeling well and directly ordered the cavalry to find the source of the plague. Anyway, he did not plan to come out immediately. The Holy Light Knights were quite efficient. It did not take long for them to find the cause. It was confirmed that there was a problem with the town's water source. It was probably something dirty that floated upstream, causing the town's residents to be in such a sorry state. But although the problem was not big, the residents who were lying down were really troublesome. If they were to use ordinary medicine to treat them, with the few doctors in the town, it would take at least a week to treat them. This was definitely not possible. At this time, Victor naturally had to get off the car to help. Being able to become the deputy chief of the Northern Inquisition, Victor certainly had the strength. At least, casting a large-scale purification spell was not a problem. Immediately, under the mayor's shout, all the infected residents gathered in the square. The door opened at this time, and the expressionless Victor quickly got off the car with a holy magic shield. Light magic had a strong restraining effect on filthy things. Victor was smart, and in order to avoid smelling the stench, he directly activated his magic shield. But although the problem of the smell was solved, Victor naturally didn't want to stay here for too long. As soon as he got out of the car, he didn't bother to greet the mayor. He directly waved the magic staff in his hand, his lips constantly muttering an incantation, his hands suddenly raised high. Light purification. Buzz. With a soft hum, the robe of light fluttered. A column of pure white light suddenly descended from the sky. It looked righteous and majestic. It directly covered every corner of the square and shrouded the residents like a veil. It had to be said that among all magic, light magic looked the best. Even Victor's wretched old man looked more dignified. The residents within the coverage area also had expressions of enjoyment on their faces, and their deathly pale complexions gradually began to fade. This wasn't to say that the purification spell was awesome. The key was that the effect of the poison was very low, so under the illumination of the spell, the poison was greatly reduced. But at this moment, the atmosphere suddenly became a little strange. First, it was one person, then a group of people. Then, the residents who were enjoying themselves with their heads raised trembled in unison. Their eyes widened as they stared straight at the sky with a frightened look on their faces. Victor didn't notice this situation. He was now all thinking about leaving this place as soon as possible. Seeing the residents standing still, he couldn't help but frown and look at the mayor beside him. He said unhappily, "What are you still doing here? Hurry up and get the next batch of people in." Although the square was not small, it certainly couldn't accommodate all the residents of the town. Naturally, they would have to take turns to purify the area. However, the mayor acted as if he didn't hear anything. He raised his trembling arm, wanting to point but not daring to. He swallowed hard and said, "Cess, sir, gulp. Look, Vic's expression turned ugly when he saw this. He raised his head angrily and said, "What are you looking at? Oh, God." His pupils suddenly shrank and dilated. A numbing feeling spread from the top of his head to the soles of his feet, until his whole body felt a little light. The breeze wasn't dry, and the light was warm. The sky was still the same azure blue sky, and the clouds were still the same faint flowing clouds. But in the air, a huge shadow was forming out of thin air. It was holding a torch and wearing a hemp garment. His shoulders, calves, and other parts of his body were exposed. The halo of light was dazzling. It was vaguely a handsome and imposing young man. This image was very familiar to ordinary people, let alone Vika, because it could be seen everywhere in the brand and even in this small town. Not far from the dilapidated church, there was a solid statue standing at the highest point, the God of Light. This was the statue of the God of Light. As everyone knew, any religion, even if it was a third-rate religion, knew that it had to be covered with a layer of mysterious clothing. And this so-called mysterious clothing had a professional general term, which was called a miracle. Brand's official religion only recognized one religion, and that was the Temple of Light. Since the establishment of the Temple of Light thousands of years ago, miracles were not uncommon. It happened about once every few decades or centuries. For example, the statue of the Mountain Creek goddess in Mountain Creek City, which was later recognized by the Temple of Light as the first-generation saint. Her miraculous act at that time was to add magic to the spring water and heal the entire city. Because of this, she was named as a goddess. But who would have thought that in this remote town there would be another miracle, and this time it was the God of Light himself? Wow. Perhaps they were awakened by Vitga's exclamation. All the people in the field came back to their senses, and suddenly they were excited and in an uproar. Then, whether they were believers or non-believers, they couldn't help but look away, as if they didn't dare to blaspheme the majesty of the God. Then, a large number of people knelt down, hands clasped together, and kept chanting the prayer doctrine of the Temple of Light. The scene was solemn and solemn. Vitga's body trembled, and he looked at the statue in the sky that was getting more and more solid. His throat rolled, and he made meaningless sounds. His mind was now blank, and he had completely lost the ability to think. A variety of complex emotions surged in his heart. Shock, excitement, fear, disbelief. Is there really a God in this world? Could it be that my sudden kindness touched the God? Or did the God find out what I did in the past and want to judge me? The huge statue of the God of Light was still quietly floating in the air. Compared to the previous vague shadow, it was now more real and clear, and even the fine lines of the linen clothes could be seen. The dazzling light behind the statue was vast and mighty, and it looked more dignified and majestic. Clang! The slight sound of armor colliding behind him finally woke Vitga up. When he looked up, the people in front of him spread out, and they were all kneeling on the ground. Turning around, the holy light knights in holy armor were also kneeling on one knee, and their faces were full of excitement and devotion. Vitga's knees went soft, and he couldn't help but kneel down. Then he shook his head, moved to the side of the cavalry captain behind him, and asked in a trembling voice, Do you feel magic fluctuation? Although the statue of the God of Light was in front of him, the ambitious Vitga still couldn't believe it. He was worried that the statue was caused by magic. So although he himself was a light magician, he still confirmed it with the cavalry captain. No, absolutely not. The cavalry captain grabbed Vitga's arm, and his expression was very excited. Sir, this is a miracle. This is a miracle of the Father God. Miracle, miracle. Vitga murmured a few times, and the wrinkles on his old face were completely relaxed. There was a faint, crazy joy, and he unconsciously whispered, I'm rich. I'm going to be rich this time. Vitga, worthy of the Vitga, who climbed up step by step from the bottom. After the initial shock, he immediately realized that his chance had come. Although he didn't know the reason, and although he didn't really believe in the existence of God in this world, the statue of the God of Light did appear when he purified the people. What did this mean? This meant that he would become the spokesperson of God in the world. Under this kind of situation, no matter what background or power, he would be swept aside. He could definitely go one step further in the upper level of the Temple of Light. No, he could go one step further. Realizing this, Vitga barely suppressed the ecstasy in his heart. He clasped his hands, and for the first time, he really devoted himself to infinite devout prayer. Oh, thank God, praise God. Chapter 751. The huge statue of the god of light was still floating in the air above the town. But the atmosphere on the hill, not far from here, was completely different. There was no solemnity, only relaxation, and even a little frivolous. It's crooked, crooked. Turn left a little, turn a little more. TCH. Hurry up and take your hand away. Do you want the people below to see your carrot-sized finger on the forehead of the god of light? At the top of the hill, Tang In was in high spirits as he directed the two members of the gray space to move left and right, making sure that the things in their hands were the best. And with the slight adjustments here, the giant statue above the town became clearer and more solid, dignified and solemn. That's right, no one knew whether a miracle was real or not. However, the so-called miracle in the sky above the small town was indeed created by Twain. Of course, although he came up with the idea, the things in the hands of the members of the gray space, a small alchemy device with an uncomplicated structure, a reflecting lens, and a lifelike statue of the god of light, came from Lena's alchemy laboratory. Tang now knew how important a professional master alchemist was. Originally, according to his idea of projection, he just needed to find a place with the back of the mountain and imprint the statue on it. But after Lena heard his idea, she made this alchemy device overnight and directly reflected the statue into the air. This way, without a carrier, it would undoubtedly be more realistic. After all, things like gods would only be more reasonable and more shocking if they were floating in the air. And judging from the reaction of the town, Tang Un's bold move was undoubtedly successful. This, after a moment of silence, Raymond withdrew his dazed gaze and looked at Tang In with a complicated expression. This is the plan you were talking about? Tang In smiled and nodded. That's right. How is it? Do you feel surprised? Surprised? Haha, I'm really surprised. Raymond smiled bitterly, speechless. This was the truth. Raymond was a Puritan, and his faith in the Temple of Light was unquestionable. So when he saw the statue of the god of light suddenly appear in front of him, his legs almost went soft, and he knelt on the ground. Even now, he still couldn't believe that this dignified statue was fake. This was beyond his scope of understanding. May I ask, how did you do it? He pointed at the props and said, Can't you see it now? Everything is here. If it's the principle, Tang In rubbed his forehead, then it's more complicated. Do you understand projection technology? Do you know what a small hole looks like? Obviously, you don't understand, so it's hard to say. Of course, I didn't really understand either, so it was even harder to say. Of course, Redmond didn't know that the man in front of him was just an armchair strategist. Shaking his head, he said, All right, then I just want to ask you, what is your purpose in doing this? After a pause, he said, Although I don't want to admit it, that despicable guy Videga is indeed very resourceful. If you artificially create a miracle here, it is very likely that he will use it. Tang In grinned and said, it's not very likely. It's definitely going to be used by him. Let me ask you a question. Do you know Videga? Raymond was stunned for a moment, and before he could say anything, Tang In had already answered his own question. I'm guessing that in your heart, Videga must be a despicable, shameless, cunning, and unscrupulous, disgusting fellow, right? With a chuckle, Tang In shook his head and said, That's all right, but it's not complete. In my opinion, the most important characteristic of Videga is that he is greedy or he is overly ambitious. Of course, this is normal. Most people who climb up from the bottom are very insecure. This also prompts them to hold on tightly to everything in their hands, and they will also peep at the things in the hands of others. From the intelligence, Videga is such a person, so he won't let go of this great opportunity to make a meteoric rise. Speaking of this, Tang In looked at the stunned Raymond and said, It's said that the one who knows a person best is his opponent, but obviously, Mr. Raymond, you are not a competent opponent. After a moment, Raymond, whose expression was uncertain, sighed and nodded. I admit, you are right. This is Videga's character. But you still haven't answered my question. Because this question doesn't need to be answered. Tangan looked in the direction of the town, the corner of his mouth raised slightly. What do you think Videga will do next after getting such an opportunity? Redmond didn't even think about it before replying. Of course, he sent people out to spread the news and invited the higher-ups of the temple to witness his identity as God's spokesperson. Redmond paused, as if he had thought of something, and his body suddenly shook. It seems that you have thought of it. Well, Videga wants to be the spokesperson of God. Very well, I will help him mobilize the secret organization to spread the word for him and directly create a God. But in the end, this miracle was only fake. The more people spread the word, the more serious the backlash will be. And it's not just him. Tang In waved his hand, indicating the members of the gray space to gradually withdraw the effect of the statue. He then took a deep breath and narrowed his long and narrow eyes. For me, Videga is just a cover. Imagine, when the believers are excited about this once-in-a-century miracle, but they find out that this miracle is just an illusion, a scam made up by Videga to gain status. What kind of reaction will they have? Then, what Videga has done before will surface in a timely manner, such as keeping female believers in captivity, killing an upright clergyman, your father, and so on. What kind of reaction will the believers have? Yes, Videga will be dead. He will be executed by the Temple of Light for shirking the responsibility. But this is far from enough. The believers will think, they will doubt if the previous miracle was also done by the Temple of Light. They will doubt if the other clergymen are also so dirty. The human heart is very interesting. Sometimes people would rather forgive a thief with a bad record than forgive a hero who has made a mistake. Pause for a while. Tangan turned to look at the stupefied Redmond and said calmly, "What do you think? You want to collapse the Temple of Light." Redmond's expression changed. He hated the Temple of Light, but he only hated Videga, the black sheep, and the ugly state of the temple. He did not want to completely collapse the Temple of Light. He himself was an unwavering Puritan. Tangan's eyes flashed, and he patted Redmond's shoulder with a smile. You think too much. Yes, this will shake the foundation of the Temple of Light, but it will only shake it. As for completely collapsing the Temple of Light, you think too highly of me. This was the truth. Tangan's plan to destroy the Temple of Light was vicious, but it was unrealistic to say that he wanted to destroy the Temple of Light. However, Redmond looked at the smiling Tang In, and his heart could not help but tremble. He began to doubt if it was too rash of him to cooperate with this person. This was not to purify the faith, but to directly destroy the Temple of Light. Tang In looked at the suddenly silent Redmond. He naturally knew what the other party was thinking, but he did not care. Since you're already on my pirate ship, don't joke around if you still want to get off halfway. While they were talking, the statue of light in the middle of the town slowly faded and finally disappeared into the blue sky. Okay, the movie is over. Let's retreat. Tang In clapped his hands and called out. Retreat? Retreat to where? Tang In waved his hand nonchalantly. Of course, we're going to leave with Vitega. Well, it should be one of the nearby cities. The town is too small after all. With Vitega's ambition, this coronation stage is definitely not enough. Redmond nodded and walked back a few steps. As if he suddenly thought of something, he looked back at the town and suddenly asked, Right, the people in the town were all poisoned. You didn't do it, right? Tang In stopped and turned around with a stunned face. He spread his hands innocently and said, Please, of course I didn't do it. Do you think I'm such an unscrupulous person? Okay, let's say I'm such a person. But after coming here, when have I ever left your sight? Redmond paused and thought for a moment. He suddenly lowered his head and said, sorry. It's okay. I know what you're thinking. You think the timing is too coincidental. But there's no other way. It happened so coincidentally. Maybe God wants to deal with Vitega, this despicable person. Tangan did not care, but after he turned around, the corner of his mouth raised slightly. I didn't do it, but I can send someone to do it. Just catch a scavenger and throw it into the upstream water source. It's that simple. Chapter 752. As Tangan expected, the town's population was still too small to satisfy Whittaker's great ambition. He didn't stay in the town for long. He took a team of holy light knights and rushed to a nearby medium-sized city to spread the news. What happened next was a matter of course. In just 3 days' time, Whittaker's kindness had purified the plague in the town, and the news of God's blessing was spread all over Bran. Of course, Whittaker alone couldn't do this. But with Tangan's secret organization in the north, it was easy. Suddenly, all kinds of news were spread. The God of Light has come to the world, and his power is mighty. Whittaker, the deputy of the judge, listened to the gospel of God and chose a day to announce to the believers. Everyone was celebrating. As the only officially recognized religion, the Temple of Light's position in Bran was unquestionable. Plus, after thousands of years of development, the glory of the God of Light had been deeply imprinted in the hearts of Bran people. Among them, even if some people were not believers of the Temple of Light, they would still have a good impression of it. In that case, there was no need to mention the existence of believers and fanatics to begin with. Now, a miracle had appeared. When the God of Light threw down the statue, all the believers went crazy. In just a few days, whether in the north or the far south, regardless of whether they lived in a bustling town or a farm in a remote mountain range, a large number of believers were like streams flowing to the sea. They traveled thousands of miles to this originally inconspicuous town, hoping to feel the majestic aura left behind by God at a close distance. In addition to the ordinary believers, the important people of the Temple of Light in the north also came after receiving the news from Whittaker. The first thing they did when they arrived was not to congratulate Whittaker. To be honest, they were jealous of Whittaker. Of course, the premise was that the miracle must be real. Therefore, as soon as they arrived, they went straight to the town. It was easy to investigate. After all, there were many witnesses at the scene. As long as they used mind magic to confirm what the townspeople had seen, and then learned the situation from the Holy Light Knights, they would be able to confirm that the statue was not a product of magic. Of course, this was not a problem. The statue was not a product of magic in the first place. It was a product of science in a field that they had never been involved in. In fact, most of the clergy were not as certain as the believers about the existence of God, although the believers' certainty was the result of their propaganda. Of course, it was impossible to say that they didn't believe it. After all, they often heard about it, and some people even believed in it for their whole lives. Even if it was said 1,000 times, the effect of self-suggestion alone would not make them firmly deny it. Take it with a pinch of salt. This was the attitude of the great figures who held high positions in the Temple of Light. And now, after a series of investigations, these big shots didn't find any flaws. They could only secretly criticize Vicar for stepping on dog sh*t this time. They had to admit that the miracle was real. With the confirmation of these big shots, the attitude of the outside world was undoubtedly more heated. Immediately, a well-known painter announced that he wanted to depict the scene of God's descent. Some people proposed to erect a statue of the God of Light in the middle of the town. There were also believers who wanted to organize a crazy 1,000-mile pilgrimage. There were different opinions. But in any case, this originally inconspicuous town was completely on fire. As the saying goes, when a man achieves the Tao, his chickens and dogs will also ascend to heaven. This town would develop into a northern holy city like Mountain Creek City. And to say who benefited the most, it was undoubtedly Vicar. He was worthy of being called a person who climbed up from the bottom by means of black-hearted means. His ability to seize opportunities was first class. During the publicity campaign, Vittega vividly described the story of him listening to the gospel of the Father God. It was reasonable and well-founded. It could be imagined that once Vicar confirmed his identity as the spokesperson of God, then his future would be absolutely bright. At least the barren north could not accommodate him. There should be a position for him in the Temple of Light headquarters. As the saying goes, good things don't last overnight. Vickers saw that the propaganda was successful, and very decisively, 3 days after God's descent, he announced that he would announce the gospel of God of light to the believers from afar. Ma City, an inconspicuous medium-sized city in the north. But now everyone in the city was extremely convinced that history would remember this day, and would also remember this previously inconspicuous city. And the facts later proved that their expectations were basically correct. History would indeed remember this city, but the evaluation was hard to say. It was close to noon, it was time to eat, but every street in Ma City was crowded with excited people. As far as the eye could see, there were brown, red, grayish-white hair, all kinds of hair mixed together, and it could be said to be a marvelous sight. With the continuous flow of people in all directions, the central destination soon appeared, the church in the city. Announcing the gospel of God of light was a big event. So, a high platform was built early to ensure that even if the believers couldn't get close, they could still see the figure of the person on the platform from afar. The church door had also been open early, but except for some lucky people who came early, there was basically no one outside the church. But although there were a lot of people, there was basically no noise. Everyone was looking inside the church, and their burning eyes almost melted the church's colored crystal glass. I didn't expect that there would be so many believers. It's really, unexpected. In front of the floor-to-ceiling window inside the church, a handsome young man looked at the grand scene outside and couldn't help but shake his head and sigh with emotion. Then he turned his head and looked to the side with a healing smile on his face. Hee, I said it would be very lively this time. If you have nothing to do, you should come out and walk around more. Don't always practice your marksmanship. Occasionally feel the enthusiasm and worship of the believers. Just think of it as relaxing. That's a show off, Owens. Moreover, practicing marksmanship is relaxing for me. A woman wearing a wholly radiant armor with a resolute and valiant expression, but there was some melancholy between her eyebrows, lightly said. If Tangen was here, he would definitely recognize the identity of this woman and turn around to leave. Because this was Sylvia. Owens, hearing this, the corner of his mouth slightly drew back, and his face showed disapproval. Relax? How could those dozens of targets be destroyed? His words paused, but Sylvia suddenly glanced at him with a strong sense of warning. After retracting her gaze, Sylvia's expression became slightly gloomy, and the melancholy between her eyebrows became more obvious. Scenes of those unbearable memories seemed to appear in front of her eyes again, and her body trembled slightly. In a sense, the evil body Tang's calculations were correct. Once the seed of darkness was planted in a fanatic with a pure mind like Sylvia, it would be very difficult to completely eliminate it unless Tang was killed as soon as possible. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult, almost impossible. Of course, now was far from the extent of betraying her faith, but the little bit of doubt towards her faith was enough to torment Sylvia. She was at a loss, absent-minded, and a little panicked. Only by madly practicing her marksmanship to vent her emotions could she be slightly covered up. It was also because of this that she agreed to come and take a look with Owens after hearing the news of the sudden appearance of a miracle. Because she wanted to prove, or rather, to convince her little bit of doubt, that God really existed and was not as illusory as that damn guy said. As for why he did not come to save her at that time, it should be because she did not pray devoutly enough. Sylvia, Oh, what's wrong? Amidst the repeated calls, Sylvia recovered from her complicated thoughts and turned her head to ask, I feel that you've been acting weird since you came back from the northern wilderness this time. Owens looked at Sylvia strangely, then shook his head and looked at the crowd outside, frowning slightly. I just wanted to say, are there too many believers this time? Well, I don't doubt the believers' worship of miracles, but in just 3 days, the news has spread too far. Her thin eyebrows raised slightly. Is it? Maybe it's the effect of Sir Vitka's own publicity. Well, you suspect that there's an outsider adding fuel to the fire? Sylvia naturally knew that the gentle and good-natured handsome young man next to her was meticulous, But after thinking about it, she spread her hands and said, "If there is such a person, what is his purpose? It's hard to say. Haha, I'm just guessing." With a few chuckles, Owens looked a little hesitant, then looked around and lowered his voice. "But you said that the miracle in the town. Is it true?" Sylvia's face suddenly became serious and turned her head. She spread her hands and said, "Don't get me wrong. I'm not doubting the Father. Well, how should I say it? I've dealt with Vitka before, and he's not a person with pure faith, so the way he does things needs to be considered." Owens's words were vague, but Sylvia naturally understood the meaning behind it. She suddenly frowned. "You suspect that he's faking it? But we've also been to the town, and the civilians and the Holy Knights have no problem. They did see the Father in person. How do you explain this?" Her words were somewhat impolite, and she was almost reprimanding him. Of course, there was a reason for this, but at the same time, Sylvia's unconsciously mixed personal factors. She absolutely didn't want this miracle to be fake, because it was very important to strengthen her faith. Owens noticed her fierce resistance and suddenly opened his mouth in surprise. Then he spread his hands and smiled, and said insincerely, "Maybe I'm thinking too much. Ha!" Sylvia glanced at him and frowned. She wanted to say something, but at this time, there was a burst of cheers outside, and the sound was like thunder. Turning her head, it turned out that Vitka, wearing a holy golden robe, was walking up the stairs with a smile on his face. He waved his hands in all directions and walked to the top of the high platform. But at this time, Sylvia's eyes flashed, as if she felt something, and suddenly turned her head to look at the left side of the church, where there were all kinds of high and low roofs. "What's wrong?" Owens turned his head. Squinting her eyes, Sylvia looked a little puzzled. After a moment, she shook her head and withdrew her gaze. "Nothing, I just saw. Well, I must be mistaken. Oh." Chapter 753. Just as Vitger proudly ascended the high platform and countless believers looked at him with burning worship, the small door of the attic was pushed open from the inside on the roof of the third floor about 100 meters away from the left side of the church. Creak! A few knights wearing the standard armor of the Temple of Light came out. The leader was a young man with an ordinary face and narrow eyes. His demeanor was relaxed, as if he was attending a small gathering with friends. He looked around and smiled as he waved his hand and said, "Hi, children, good afternoon." In addition to the Knights of Light, there were other people on the roof. There were a few children about 7 or 8 years old who were looking down from the eaves. No one wanted to miss the opportunity to listen to the gospel of God. But in such a crowded situation, the adults certainly did not dare to take the children out. After all, if they got separated, the probability of finding them was too small, so most people chose to lock the children at home. But children were naturally active, and they were very curious about the lively scene outside, so the scene in front of them appeared in front of them. After the children heard the sound of the door opening behind them, they probably thought that their parents had come to find them. They turned around and looked a little frightened. They stood there stiffly and did not respond to the young man's greeting. Touching his nose, the young man shook his head and smacked his lips. "TSK, TSK, what's wrong with children nowadays? They don't have any manners at all." "Ahem, Tang. And, sir." A middle-aged man behind him coughed twice and said with a blank expression, "It seems that we are not here to talk about children's manners." "Ah, old Raymond, relax." The young man shrugged and smiled. "Do you remember what I said before? Be patient, and you can taste the greater pleasure of success." At this point, there was no need to guess that these people were naturally Tang In and the others who had stayed here for 3 days. Although he said to be patient, the roof was only so big. Tang and did not continue to tease Raymond. He walked a few steps quickly and came to the eaves of the church. Looking down at the dense crowd and the high platform that was only a little lower than the Statue of Light, he could not help but squint. "Yo, it's quite a big scene. Isn't there tens of thousands of people? It really makes me want to throw an explosive crystal down there." Raymond, who had just walked to the edge of the roof, widened his eyes as he stared at Tang En's hands. He couldn't be blamed for being so careful. He really lacked confidence in this guy who often did things unexpectedly. What kind of expression is that?" I was just saying. Humor, humor, do you understand? With a light snort, Redmond no longer bothered to talk nonsense with Tang Un. He shifted his gaze and stared fiercely at Victor, who was about to reach the summit. He seemed to have thought of something, and his face gradually became twisted and ferocious. Tang Un glanced at him and thought for a moment before saying, "My plan is to let Victor suffer the consequences of his own actions and die in the hands of his own people from the Temple of Light. But if you want to take revenge with your own hands, I can think of a way." "No need." Taking a deep breath, Raymond slowly moved his gaze away, his eyelids drooping slightly. According to the doctrine, the clergy should be judged by the Inquisition when they make a mistake. Other organizations have no right to interfere. Let it be judged. This time, he won't be able to escape. Patting Raymond's shoulder, Tang Un nodded slightly and didn't say anything. Although he didn't like Raymond's set of puritanical rules, everyone had their own beliefs, and he wouldn't interfere with this. Turning around, Tang Un waved to the members of the gray space holding the props. "Let's begin. The big show is bound to happen." Fu *K. Tang Un paused, as if he had caught a glimpse of something. His expression changed abruptly, and he immediately pulled Redmond to the roof. "Ugh!" Raymond, who was caught off guard, fell to the ground and couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. Ignoring the pain, he looked up at Tang Un, who had always been calm, but now had an undisguised look of shock, and asked, "What's wrong?" Tang Un wiped his forehead, and his expression was extremely strange. He was stunned for a moment before he shook his head and said, "Nothing. I saw an acquaintance." "Well, according to the saying of my hometown, this is called enemies on a narrow road." Raymond paused for a moment, then said nervously, "This won't affect the plan, right?" "Of course not." "Yes, but I have to make some changes." Tang Un rubbed his chin and was about to fall in a deep thought, but his gaze suddenly lit up when he saw the children not far away. The corners of his mouth gradually rose, and he smiled and waved his hand like a big bad wolf trying to kidnap Little Red Riding Hood. "Little children, come over quickly. Big Brother will give you a very interesting toy." It was noon, the sky was clear, and the clouds were drifting. On the high platform, although the biting cold wind was blowing, Vitega couldn't help but feel a fire burning in his chest as he looked down at the ants below and felt the almost tangible worship and respect from them. He couldn't help but be filled with ambition. Finally, he had reached this step. Finally, he succeeded. His old body trembled slightly, not because of nervousness, but because of excitement. Strong excitement. Even though he had seen a lot of things, he couldn't help but feel numb, and his feet were floating as if he was standing on clouds. Taking a deep breath and barely suppressing the joy in his heart, Vitega slowly bowed, and his slightly drawn-out voice sounded very solemn and serious at this time. "Devout believers, I am Vitega, and I would like to give you the blessing of the Light Father." Whoosh! Thunderous cheers rang out, and the sound waves continued to roll upward like a strong wind, causing Vitega's robe to flutter. Of course, the believers had reason to be excited. After all, Vitega was now the spokesperson of the light God in the world, and the blessings from his mouth were the real blessings of God. After enjoying the cheers for about 10 seconds, Vitega pressed his palm, and then in a short moment, the sound waves from near to far kept retreating, and in an instant, they disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, Vitega couldn't help but nod with satisfaction. He enjoyed the feeling of being in complete control, and it really fascinated him. Fortunately, Vitega still knew what to do next. After calming down, he was about to announce the gospel of God to the believers. In fact, God didn't give him any gospel, but so what? He was now the spokesperson of God, and naturally, whatever he said was gospel. As for whether this would offend God or not, to be honest, Vitega really didn't care. He wasn't a pure believer, and he had done a lot of evil things. But even so, didn't God still cast a statue on him? What did this mean? This meant that God didn't care about the evil things he had done before. In this way, this little white line naturally didn't matter. Moreover, Miracles generally only came once in 100 years, or even hundreds of years, and Vitega knew that he wouldn't live that long. So, after I die, who cares if there's a flood? This was Vitega's current thought. Ahem. Clearing his throat, Vitega put on a dignified look and was about to raise his hand to announce the gospel of God that he had made up long ago. But at this moment, suddenly, whoosh, another uproar suddenly sounded from below. Because there were too many and too many voices, it finally became a low, buzzing noise. Vitega's face suddenly sank, and he was a little unhappy. I was just about to announce the gospel of God. What kind of attitude is this? Just as he was about to speak, the dense figures in his line of sight were like a tide, high and low, and continued to spread to the distance until the end of his sight. The scene was spectacular. Everyone was kneeling at the same time at this moment. What's going on? Vitega was stunned. He didn't think that he had the power to make tens of thousands of people kneel. And why was this scene so familiar? Vitega subconsciously looked up, and his expression suddenly became sluggish. He slowly opened his mouth and was dumbfounded. In midair, a huge figure was slowly condensing from the void, holding a torch, and half of it was covered in hemp clothes. The shocking scene from before replayed again. Vitega's legs went soft. Looking at the huge statue that seemed to be within reach, he couldn't help but kneel down. His head was full of chaotic thoughts. F***CK. Father God, you're giving me too much face. You're swearing to support me to the end. Chapter 754. The reappearance of a statue was undoubtedly beyond everyone's expectations. Of course, this accident was a pleasant surprise. At least for now, all the believers went crazy, and like a plague, they knelt down and prayed. Some were chanting doctrines, expressing their devout faith. Some were telling their own suffering, hoping to get the blessings of God. Some of them were muttering about their sins in a low voice, begging for forgiveness. Mixed together, there was no sense of clamor. There was only an indescribable solemnity and solemnity. Among them, the great figure of the Temple of Light, standing behind the high platform, was also shocked. He knelt down, and while talking about his pure faith, he sighed that Vika had completely profited this time. 2 miracles, and both of them were on Vika. What this meant was self-evident behind the floor-to-ceiling windows inside the church. Owens, who was kneeling on one knee, seemed to be respectful, but his eyes were fixed on the statue floating in the air, and he whispered, "No magic fluctuations, no space ripples, nothing. Is this the Father God?" "Oh, one. See." Suppressing her strong dissatisfaction, Sylvia, who was also kneeling on one knee, stared fiercely at him and said stiffly, one word at a time. There was no doubt that Sylvia's mood was absolutely excited because she finally saw a miracle with her own eyes and also confirmed that God really did exist and not just existed in fantasy. This was undoubtedly a great encouragement for her to strengthen her faith and defeat the dark seed in her heart. So, she naturally couldn't tolerate Owens's blasphemous attitude. It's not a suspicion, well, curious. Curious about the mysterious power of the Father God. Now that the statue was in front of him, even if Owens still had doubts in his heart, he naturally couldn't say it out loud. What's more, he was very clear about Sylvia's temper. If he didn't do it right, the other side might really send him to the Inquisition. Seeing that Sylvia's expression was slightly relaxed, Owens hurriedly made a prayer gesture in front of his chest, and his expression was very respectful. "Ah, great and benevolent Father God, your devout believer Owens sends you." "Ah." The words suddenly stopped, but the statue in the air suddenly disappeared, instantly moving from the high platform to the sky outside the church. Then, without waiting for him to react, he continued to teleport, flickering in midair. His movements were ethereal and ghostly, causing the believers below to exclaim from time to time, as if it was a prank. Owens was dumbfounded, and he subconsciously muttered to himself, "Is this the power of the gods? Without any spatial fluctuations, they can teleport?" This was a good explanation, but what happened next was unexplainable. With a final flash, the statue finally stopped in the air above the church. But before everyone could breathe a sigh of relief, a large black shadow suddenly appeared in the air, completely covering the figure of the statue. Then, in front of everyone's eyes, the black shadow turned, and a face that was as big as a pancake appeared in the air. He looked like a little boy with a chubby face stained with dust. There was a long, shiny snot under his nose about to drip down. He seemed to realize that this was a little indecent, so his nose suddenly opened and closed, and the shiny snot was instantly sucked back. Then, he opened his mouth and smiled happily. A few decayed teeth were clearly visible. The grand scene fell into a deathly silence. Everyone raised their heads and stared dumbfoundedly at the not-so-cute, sloppy child. They all lost their voices. At this time, in the crowded crowd outside the church, a strong man in plain clothes scratched his head in confusion and subconsciously pulled a plump ant next to him. "Aunt Belle, is this, your butt face?" "No, I don't know. It seems a little like him." At this point, the scene began to become a little strange. It was not because everyone recognized the sloppy child. Of course, the people who lived nearby would definitely recognize him. But in front of tens of thousands of people, there were many believers who came from afar, so it was insignificant. The reason why it was strange was that everyone knew that the current situation was a little abnormal. The statue of a god was one thing, but what was with the appearance of a sloppy child? Was he the son of God? But this appearance was a little too shabby. While they were puzzled, the farce was still going on. The child who was making a face suddenly disappeared from their sight, as if he had been pushed by someone. Then, the statue appeared again, but in an instant, it was covered by a little girl with goat horn braids. Then, the images in the air became a little chaotic. It seemed that the sloppy little boy from before and the little girl with goat horn braids were fighting, tearing at each other, grabbing each other's braids, and pinching each other's faces. The images of the boy, the girl, and the statue appeared one after another, and it was very chaotic. This is a little strange. Owens looked at the chaotic scene in the air in a daze, and his face was full of astonishment. Sylvia's determined expression was also a little shaken. The light in her eyes gradually dimmed, as if she had thought of something. She suddenly turned her head and looked at the roof of the buildings on the left, which had made her feel strange just now. Squinting her eyes, she quickly locked onto a rooftop where people were fighting. Because of the angle, Sylvia, who was standing below, could not see clearly, but Vika, who was on the high platform, was different. He looked around and saw that on the rooftop, about 4 or 5 short figures were fighting. He then looked up at the images in the air and was stunned, muttering to himself, "God, what the hell is going on?" No one could answer this question, but the chaotic battle in the air had already ended. Because of her early puberty, the little girl became the final winner and occupied all the images by herself. Then, she stroked her messy goat horn braids and smiled proudly. The next moment, a small area of chaos broke out. It was the bottom of the 3-story building. Someone had heard the crying and fighting coming from above, and they squeezed through the crowd, broke through the door, and quickly rushed into the small building. F***CK. Owens's expression changed, and he realized that something was wrong. He rarely swore, and suddenly got up and rushed to the church door. "Get out! Something is wrong." Sylvia did not move. She was still kneeling on one knee, looking at the little girl in a daze. Could it be all this is fake? In this world, there really is no God. More than 10 seconds later, under Vitka's stupefied gaze, a group of figures rushed to the roof of the 3-story building. Then, the little girl in the air was stunned, as if she was scared. Then, the little girl was lifted up, and a desperate man's face appeared in the air. Hysterical roars echoed. "It's fake. It's all fake. There are no miracles, no gods. We have been deceived. We have been deceived." Boom! The roars and roars shook the sky. If the crowd below could be described as waves, then now it was the sea under a storm. Anger spewed out, and the waves soared to the sky. Feeling the undisguised anger, Vika took a few steps back and sat down on the high platform. His face instantly turned pale, and beads of sweat rolled down his face. He didn't know what had happened at all. Why did he become like this when he was fine just now? Could it be that someone was trying to frame him? Yes, it must be like this. Someone was jealous of my luck, so they set me up. Thinking of this, Vika's face instantly turned red. Like a dying fish struggling on the shore, he quickly jumped up, waved his hands, and shouted with all his might, "This is not real. I was set up. I'm the representative of God. I am really... Damn your representative." With a loud shout, Owen's figure suddenly appeared on the high platform and knocked Vicar unconscious with a simple chop. But it was all too late. Because of Vika's roars, the tens of thousands of panicked believers finally found an outlet. "Vika, it's him. He deceived us. How dare he fake miracles? He must be judged by God. God my ass. Beat him to death. Beat him to death." Apart from the locals, those who were able to make the journey in just 3 days were naturally true believers. Their faith in the Temple of Light was unquestionable, but because of this, after knowing that they were deceived, everyone went crazy. Extreme emotional disparity created extreme insanity. Boom, boom, boom. Under the crowd, the iron railings, gates, walls, and so on around the church were pushed to the ground in an instant, like a lonely boat in the sea. Then, countless believers with ferocious and distorted faces rushed in crazily. In just a few minutes, the situation was completely reversed. Standing at the back, the important figures of the Temple of Light were completely dumbfounded. Looking at the vast sea of people in front of them, their bodies trembled and they stood rooted to the ground. There were also some important figures with rich combat experience who subconsciously picked up their staffs and prepared to attack. But in an instant, Owens rushed over like a whirlwind, his spear knocking down the staff, and roared, "Are you King crazy? Do you want to die?" Owens' choice was undoubtedly correct. Not to mention whether or not they could defeat the tens of thousands of people, they could not defeat them. Even if they could, if a clergyman dared to attack a believer, this matter would be completely blown out of proportion, and even the Temple of Light would be implicated. But unfortunately, the problem that Owens realized, some observant people could also realize it. Suddenly, there was an angry roar. Murder! The Temple of Light is killing people. Hearing this, Owens suddenly turned his head. In the midst of the crowd, not far away, he saw a big man with bloodstains all over his face lying on his back, screaming miserably. In front of him, the Knight of Light was holding his spear horizontally with a blank face, as if he had not recovered at all. Damn it! Owens looked at the crazier and more resentful eyes of the believers around him, and his heart sank. He knew that this matter was inevitably blown out of proportion. Previously, he felt that there were too many believers this time, as if there was someone secretly behind the scenes. Now, combined with the current situation, everything was clear. Someone wanted to defame the Temple of Light. Of course, even if Owens knew that this was just a conspiracy, now that the public was angry, he could not defend himself and was helpless. Taking a deep breath, he decisively waved his spear and shouted, "Everyone listen to my orders. Retreat, retreat, retreat. All of you retreat." Chapter 755. As mentioned before, Emoma City was destined to be recorded in history, but its reputation would go down in history for thousands of years. Of course, Emoma City was a bit innocent, because it was not them who chose Vediga, but Vediga chose them. So it was not an exaggeration to say that when an adult sat at home, disaster would come from the sky. But when tens of thousands of believers who had lost their minds pushed down the church in the city, destroyed countless surrounding buildings, destroyed half of the city, and caused countless casualties, they were destined to be the scapegoat. Moreover, the impact of the situation would not stop because of the damage to the city. Bigger waves were spreading at an extremely fast speed. Although the news about the miracle had only been fermenting for 3 days, It had already spread widely under the propaganda of Vediga and the secret organization. Although it was not known to everyone in the brand, at least it covered most of the vast northern area. This could be seen from the number of believers that severely blocked Embark city on the day of Vediga's gospel. It was also because of this foundation that when the news of Embark city spread out, it set off a storm. The miracle was fake? This was a grand scam that Vediga wrote and directed for his own benefit. If it were not for a few children who inadvertently exposed it, the world would be kept in the dark by him. After Vediga was exposed, not only was he not tried, but he was rescued by the people of the temple, and there were knights of light who injured the believers on the spot. Shocking news continued to spread one after another, causing everyone to be dumbstruck. And this was just the beginning. Then all kinds of rumors about Vediga became even more rampant. When Vediga was the bishop of Blue Tile City, he colluded with his accomplices and maliciously harmed the righteous clergy, causing them to be wronged until now. Vediga took advantage of his identity and embezzled countless donations from the believers. There were also rumors that he secretly imprisoned young and beautiful female believers. The news was mostly reasonable, but there were also rumors that were groundless, and it was difficult to distinguish between the truth and the lies. But in any case, Vediga was gradually being demonized, and this was an indisputable fact. If Vediga heard these news, he would definitely cry out for injustice. Yes, the latter part of the story sounded familiar, and he did do a lot of things. But regarding the miracle, he really wasn't faking it. Unfortunately, not to mention that he didn't have the chance to redress his grievances. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to defend himself. Because the children at the scene saw the fake props installed by the knights wearing the Temple of Light's armor. Needless to say, this debt must be placed on the heads of Vitega's guards, the 2 brigades of Holy Light Knights. Of course, there were still flaws in this matter that could be found. For example, the knights who installed the fake props knew that there were children watching them, but they didn't chase them away. Instead, they left first, which was a bit unreasonable. In fact, it was not because Tang Yin was careless. His original plan was to accidentally reveal his identity as a temple knight after the statue appeared. However, this plan was undoubtedly ruined when he saw Sylvia. Tang Yin felt a little guilty, and in the end, he used Kid to complete the final blow. However, even if they knew this flaw, the Temple of Light was not interested in defending Vicar, because the temple itself was a little busy with its own affairs. To be honest, this was inevitable. Because Vitega's actions didn't only affect him. Just as Tang Yin had expected, the firm belief of the believers began to waver. The truth was in front of them. If it wasn't for a freak combination of factors, they definitely wouldn't have known that there were so many secrets behind the miracle. Did this mean that the previous successful miracles were also done in the same way? The only difference was that no one discovered it at that time. It was a very normal association, but it was fatal for the Temple of Light. Because for a religion, mystery was an essential part of its existence. It was precisely because of these unattainable and unimaginable mysteries that people felt a sense of worship. Now, regardless of whether the previous miracles of the Temple of Light were fake or not, there was no doubt that they were now regarded with suspicion. Of course, because miracles usually occurred once in 100 years or hundreds of years, it was naturally impossible to verify the authenticity of the miracles in the past. But for Tang Yin, as long as the believers had doubts in their hearts, it was enough. After all, not every crack could be automatically healed with the passage of time. Moreover, if the previous miracles were to be said to be a blow to the Temple of Light's head, in that case, the rumor that Vika had done something despicable was to stab the brilliant shrine in the heart, killing his colleagues, swallowing donations, keeping female believers in captivity. No matter how one looked at it, it didn't seem like something that could be done seamlessly by just one person. Moreover, if Vitega, the deputy head of the Inquisition, was like this, what about the other clergymen? It was also a normal association, but this association was undoubtedly more realistic. Just as Raymond had said before, the Temple of Light was rotten to the core, And the reason why no one discovered it was because their outer clothes were too dazzling and holy, completely covering the filth inside. But now, with Victor's incident, some things that were previously covered up, suppressed, or secretly eliminated gradually began to surface and were exposed to everyone's eyes. Some things were not afraid that no one would ask, but they were afraid that no one would investigate. As long as one had the heart to investigate, they could always find some shocking things. Of course, Tang-in wouldn't miss such a great opportunity. With the help of Raymond, who had been a critic of the Temple of Light for more than 10 years, it was easy to throw out a few filthy things that would attract hatred. Then, in just 2 days after the incident in Moma City, there were news that clergymen abused their power and bullied others. Believers' donations were used by a clergyman to secretly raise women, and so on. There was no doubt that these things were absolutely true. Even if there were some deviations, as long as one investigated the clergyman, more or less other filthy things could be found. It had to be said that Tang-un's move was a stab to the Temple of Light, and at the same time, to the believers' vital points. The more devout the believers were, the more crazy they would be when they were hurt. No one wanted to see the donations that they had painstakingly saved and donated with both hands, only to be used by these bastards to indulge in debauchery, and even persecute them, taking away their young daughters and beautiful wives. Even if aunts could tolerate this, even uncles couldn't. At this point, the foundation of the Temple of Light's faith had suffered an unprecedented blow. Some clergymen who were found to be problematic had been besieged by believers and killed. Even the church where the incident happened was smashed on the spot by the angry believers. The Temple of Light knew that there was definitely someone behind this, but they were too busy to investigate. Under such pressure, the Temple of Light broke out with unprecedented efficiency. In just 2 days, Vigor was pushed out to accept the trial of the public believers. In fact, according to the doctrine, clergymen who made mistakes were only subject to the internal trial of the temple, and no other organization had the right to interfere. Vigor had inadvertently created a pioneering work this time, and his name was enough to be remembered in history. Of course, he himself didn't think so. There was no doubt about the result of the trial. Vigor was tied to a stake and burned alive on the spot. According to the consistent saying of the Temple of Light, people who were burned to death didn't have souls. Not to mention returning to the arms of the God of Light. They couldn't even enter hell. It was the highest punishment of the Temple of Light. At the same time, at the trial site, a big shot of the Temple of Light apologized to the believers in tears and promised to thoroughly investigate the ugly problems that had been exposed. This matter had a lot to do with Tang-in, but when it reached his ears, he had already returned to Hanshui City with his people. To be honest, Tang-in didn't care about Vickers' life at first. He just thought of it as revenge for Raymond. The real purpose of this trip was to bring such a huge blow to the Temple of Light. As soon as he returned to Hanshui City, Tang-in once again confirmed his saying that he was born to be busy. David sent a message that the old man in brown finally couldn't bear the pressure and was returning to the Bounty Hunter Guild. Chapter 756. In the evening, on the outskirts of a remote mountain range, Tang-in, who had rushed over from Hanshui City without stopping, finally met up with David and the others. Haha, boss, long time no see. Long my ass, it's only been a week. That's true. But boss, we've all heard about what you did in Moma City. Creating a god. TSK, that's amazing. Oh, that it's nothing. It's just SOSO, third in the world. Who's first and second? Has anyone told you, David, that you have no sense of humor? After a few teasing words and greetings, Tang-un's expression turned serious. He looked around at the surrounding wilderness and frowned slightly. Where's that old guy? Is this the hiding place of the Bounty Hunter Guild's higher-ups? David did not answer immediately. Instead, he laughed strangely. Hee boss, take a guess. Damn, I find that you're getting bolder and bolder. Tang-in raised his hand and was about to slap him. David shrank his head and did not make any obvious dodging movements. Of course, it was useless to dodge. His body movement was not at the same level as Tang-un's. However, Tang was just pretending. After raising his hand, he withdrew it and touched his chin. He looked around and muttered in a low voice for a moment. No wonder the secret organization couldn't dig them out. It turns out that they were hiding in the deep mountains and forests. Well, if it's here, it's a bandit's stronghold. F***CK? Hearing this, David opened his mouth and was shocked. Boss, you guessed it. David, you idiot. Harry, who was dressed in black armor, walked over from not far away with a look of disdain. Boss was just talking to himself. You King admitted it so quickly. Who can't guess it? David was stunned and then slapped his forehead. He realized that he was stupid. Tang smiled and patted him on the shoulder. He said earnestly, "It's good that you continue to be simple-minded, because as long as I see you, my sense of superiority and intelligence spontaneously arises." Jokes aside, Tang immediately learned the details from Harry. About 2 days ago, when Tang and the others started to attack in Ma City, the brown-clothed old man finally couldn't bear the pressure and quietly left the previous hiding place with his people. After that, although he cautiously took a few detours, it was undoubtedly impossible to shake off David and the others. In the end, he arrived here and quietly disappeared into the mountain range. David and the others did not alert the enemy after tracking them down. After all, although their concealment and tracking skills were top-notch, if they really fought, the 2 Earth Stage warriors beside the brown-clothed old man would be enough to make them lose face. Therefore, to be on the safe side, they sent the news back to Hanshui City while cautiously probing their surroundings. Not long before Tang arrived, David and the others finally determined the hiding place of the Bounty Hunter Guild's higher-ups. This was also unexpected because they did not choose to hide in the town. Instead, they quietly occupied a bandit stronghold. It had to be said that the upper echelons of the guild were truly ingenious. The north was vast and sparsely populated. Except for the densely populated towns, there were few people in the vast jungles and mountains, except for bandits, mercenaries, and other special professions. Hiding here could indeed greatly reduce the possibility of being discovered. Moreover, after circling around the stronghold, Tang could not help but frown. Lying in the pile of rocks, Harry introduced in a low voice, "Boss, there are almost no flaws in the terrain of this stronghold. It's surrounded by mountains on 2 sides. One side is a winding path leading to the periphery. It's easy to defend and hard to attack. The other side goes straight to the abyss. Ordinary people can't cross it. Only a drawbridge inside the stronghold connects the 2 sides, and it should be their escape route." Tang heard this and nodded gently. It's not easy. With such tight security, Tang could enter by himself. However, the stronghold was not like the manor. Not to mention that he was not sure if the other party's higher-ups were in disguise. Even if they were not, it would be a problem to guess where the other party was hiding. Therefore, there was not much point in sneaking in alone. And if he brought David and the others, the possibility of being exposed would be greatly increased. After all, not everyone in the gray space was good at sneaking in. The main attackers like David were not good at sneaking in. After thinking about it, Tang asked in a low voice, "Have you checked the inside of the stronghold? What's the strength of the other party?" "I went in once in the afternoon. The defense near the stronghold gate is very strict, and there are many guards. Because there are 2 masters nearby, they should be Earth Stage warriors. I don't have the confidence to sneak in, so I can only choose to retreat." Well done. It's about time. Let's go back first. After avoiding the guards and approaching the stronghold to observe, Tang pondered for a while and returned to the periphery of the stronghold with Harry. "Boss, what should we do?" Although the situation was a bit difficult, David's expression did not change. On the one hand, he was confident in his own strength. On the other hand, he believed that Tang could come up with a solution. This was David's strength, but also his weakness. He was loyal enough, but at the same time, he lacked the ability to be a leader. To put it bluntly, he was a talented general, but he could not be a commander. Of course, people were different. David also admitted that he was not cut out to be a commander. His idea was very simple. That was to complete the task given by the boss. The rest was not a problem for him to consider. It's very simple. Tang In narrowed his long and narrow eyes and waved his arm. Since it's not easy to go in, then force them out. Let's go and prepare some things first. We'll make plans later in the night. Harry raised his eyebrows and showed a dagger. Then, boss, should I take people to pull out the nails around us first? The so-called nails were hidden sentries. If they wanted to do something, naturally they had to clean up the surroundings first. However, Tang In waved his hand and turned to leave. No, someone will clean up. You can go with me to prepare. David and Harry were startled when they heard this. Then, they thought of something and looked at each other. However, they did not say anything and silently followed Tang In's footsteps. Needless to say, it was naturally Michaud and the others who were going to clean up the hidden sentries. Tang In said that Michaud could not meet David, but was inevitable that they knew each other's existence. For example, in the previous battle in Hanshui City, it was Michaud who saved David. It was impossible to completely cover up. After all, the two sides were too familiar with each other, and a mask alone could not cover up anything. Of course, what should be covered up should be covered up. At least, he could not let Josiah know that Michaud was still alive. Moreover, it would be much better to have David and the others cover up for him. In addition to these reasons, the most important thing was that Tang In needed Michaud as an assistant. As he thought just now, David was not suitable to be an independent leader, and Tang In was only one person. With Michaud's help, it would undoubtedly be much easier. The terrain of the stronghold could be said to be dangerous, but it was impossible to say that there were no flaws. In addition, this was not a confrontation between two armies, and the stronghold was not a strategic place that had to be taken. Naturally, Tang In did not need to think too much about it. The bright moon hung high in the sky, and the twilight was boundless. Not long after midnight, the wind blew thick smoke from the front of the stronghold, which was the narrow and winding path, silently rolled in. At first, the guards of the stronghold did not care. It was normal for fog to rise at night, but after smelling the obvious fire and the smoke, they naturally changed their minds. Suddenly, a shrill whistle instantly broke the silence of the night sky. In just a few breaths, there were people everywhere in the stronghold, and bonfires were everywhere. Accompanied by a few angry roars, several small crossbows near the stronghold gate were pushed out. After a slightly chaotic movement, the people in the stronghold looked around, but they did not find any trace of the enemy. Before they could open their mouths to curse, suddenly, there was a sharp whistling sound, and the air was pierced. Suddenly, dozens of flames fell from the towering peaks on both sides of the stronghold like stars falling to the ground. They did not hurt anyone, but directly nailed the buildings in the stronghold, and the fire suddenly lit up. Damn it! Damn it! You are so despicable. Put out the fire! Quickly, put out the fire! Bran was not as cold as the northern wilderness, so most of the buildings here are made of wood, unlike the northern wilderness, which was basically piled up with stones. It was precisely because of this that under the continuous attack of the fire arrows, several buildings were quickly set on fire. At this time, the people in the stronghold suddenly understood the intention of the enemy, which was to directly use fire to destroy their tight defense line. It was a very simple strategy, but it was undoubtedly very effective. Not only did it make the crossbows completely useless, but it was also unrealistic to put out the fire. The stronghold was located in the mountains, and the water source was already a problem. Even if there was a mountain spring nearby, distant water could not put out a nearby fire. Of course, it was possible to separate the fire source, but would the people in the stronghold do this on the left peak? Tang In casually answered David's question about whether the enemy would obediently withdraw from the stronghold while looking around with binoculars. The enemy's strength is not low, and there are a lot of guards following them. Logically speaking, it is absolutely no problem to defend the stronghold, but they're in the light, and we are in the dark. They don't know that we only have a few dozen people, so they can't judge whether or not we can defend the stronghold. There's also the old guy who came here before. Although he did not participate in the battle by the cold river, he must know the details. TSK, a void-level warrior, 3 earth-level warriors. With such strength, they died in our hands. Do you think the enemy is afraid? Come on, of course they are afraid. It is unknown, and there is a little fear in their hearts. What choice do you think they will make? After a pause, Tang handed the binoculars to David, and the corner of his mouth rose. Look, they made a very wise decision. Well, I like it. David was stunned and quickly raised the binoculars. He saw that in the stronghold below, where flames were everywhere, there were clusters of figures retreating to the drawbridge behind in a panic. At the same time, there were a lot of guards near the stronghold gate, holding crossbows and aiming at the narrow path covered by thick fog as if they were facing a great enemy. In fact, there were only a few members of the gray space who finished setting the fire and then made a fuss. David blinked and turned his head, a little stunned. It's that simple. What else? Tang shrugged, then reached out to take the binoculars, squinted at the drawbridge behind the stronghold, and muttered to himself, well, let me see which one is more like the hidden big boss. Come out, come out. Hey, there are not many masters. Chapter 757. Under the dim light of the fire, Tang could not recognize who was the great philanthropist of Mountain Stream City, Zachary, the leader of the Northern Bounty Hunter Guild. It was not that his eyesight was bad. Tang had already locked onto a few important people who were being protected in the middle. However, in order to disguise themselves as qualified bandits, they were all dressed almost the same. There was no difference at all, so it was naturally difficult to identify them. However, this fire was not useless at all. Not only did it force the other party out of the turtle shell, but it also forced them out. Tang also found a strange situation. That was, there were not many warriors who could be called masters in this group. Although it was a rough look from what Tang observed, there were only about 15 or 16 Earth-level warriors here. Other than that, he did not find any powerhouse who had touched the threshold of void level. This was undoubtedly a bit abnormal. In any case, they were also the higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild. Previously, in order to kill Tang they sent out a void-level warrior. There was no reason for them not to leave a few for self-protection. After thinking about it, Tang still did not dare to be careless. He did not take advantage of the night to rush to assassinate. Instead, he followed behind from a distance and observed the situation first. In fact, this time Tang guessed wrong. Zachary and other higher-ups did not have any void-level warriors to protect them. It was not that they could not gather enough. Although void-level warriors were rare, they could still find a few with the large scale of the Bounty Hunter Guild. But now the timing was a bit special. The voices of protest against the Temple of Light were getting louder and louder. Some people who were not on good terms with the temple also took advantage of the situation. In this case, the Temple of Light naturally prioritized itself, gathering forces to secretly attack everywhere to calm the chaos. In this way, of course, they had no time to think about these higher-ups of the guild. The middle of the night was calm. Zachary and the others retreated in the direction of the south. Judging from the route, they would not pass through any towns in the next few days. For the time being, they could not see any specific targets. The next morning, Tang who could not see anything after repeated observations, finally could not help but test the waters, just as Zachary and the other 200 people majestically passed through a small canyon. A few Earth-stage martial artists suddenly turned their heads and shouted, "Oh, F***CKU." Someone answered straightforwardly. A figure appeared out of nowhere and rushed to the back of the group. After successfully cutting in, the figure was not in a hurry to charge. He simply stepped and spun, casually sprinkling out a few imperceptible blade lights. The surrounding guards who were caught off guard immediately covered their necks and fell to the ground. With the nature of the Bounty Hunter Guild, these guards were naturally not ordinary guards around nobles and wealthy merchants. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that they were more than qualified to be bounty hunters. But now, several of them had fallen in a single exchange. This undoubtedly showed that the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. They were not on the same level at all. The surrounding guards couldn't help but slow down when they saw this. They looked at each other with hesitation. The black shadow that jumped in was a middle-aged man with a sallow face. He was Tang In. He did not rush to attack. Instead, he stood in place and looked at the center of the crowd with a smile, as if he was trying to identify something. He looked completely arrogant. "You're courting death." The three Earth-level warriors who were closest to him couldn't help but be furious when they saw this. They burst out their Do Chi, knocked away the guards beside them, and instantly attacked. "Huh." With a long laugh, Tang In's figure flashed like a ghost. He dodged the attack and flashed into the crowd. He grabbed and threw. The surrounding guards had no room to resist. They only felt a blur in front of their eyes. They flew straight into the three Earth-level warriors like a cloud. This move was undoubtedly very annoying. The three Earth-level warriors couldn't take it. If they didn't take it, they would have to waste time dodging. They were so depressed that they roared again and again. At this moment, "Spread out," thunder roared. The six Earth-level warriors stepped forward together. Their attacks were hidden but not released. They surrounded him from all angles like a fishing net. They obviously wanted to kill him in one fell swoop. There was a tiger in front and a hungry wolf behind. But Tang Un's expression didn't change. He just grabbed another guard who couldn't disperse in time and threw him to the Earth-level warriors chasing behind him. Then he jumped over himself. Ha, good timing. Pushing the guard away, the Earth-level warrior was not afraid. Instead, he was happy. His Do Chi surged out violently and covered the big sword in his hand. He stepped forward and slashed down. His idea was simple. No matter how strong the opponent was, as long as he could delay for a few seconds, his companions could form an encirclement. At that time, the attacker would die without a doubt. But could he really delay for a few seconds? Whoosh! The big sword whistled down, but there was no feeling of force. The Earth-level warrior's heart trembled. He knew that he had missed. Before he could pull back the big sword, his eyes suddenly blurred. A sallow face appeared in front of him. The corners of his mouth were slightly curled, and his eyes were mocking. It gave people an indescribably strange feeling. Roar! The Earth-level warrior had rich combat experience. He knew that he had met an opponent with outstanding speed. With a roar, he simply threw away the big sword and directly punched with a violent Do Chi. But this time, the attack was not so easy to land, because a rotating dagger had already appeared in front of him. Blocking with a horizontal fist, being broken, attacking, retreating, attacking. Just by making a move, the Earth-grade martial artist was completely suppressed by the rainstorm-like blade light. Shocked, he hurriedly retreated, but the blade light followed like a shadow. Lower abdomen, chest, arms, thighs, in just a few breaths of time, dozens of blade lights easily broke through his defense and hit him squarely. Streams of blood spurted out from the Earth-grade martial artist's body. Finally, before his companions arrived, the Earth-grade martial artist fell backward like a broken sack. After successfully breaking through the defense, Tang In laughed wildly and swaggered away. His speed was extremely fast. The few Earth-level warriors who came late saw this and chased after him. But at this time, "Come back, don't chase." Zachary, who was in the crowd, had an extremely ugly expression. The corner of his eyes twitched as he watched the sneaky attacker leave arrogantly. In the end, he called out to the Earth-level warrior who was chasing him. Then he looked at the scattered formation around him. There were a few silent guards on the ground, and an Earth-level warrior whose chest was badly mutilated and twitching from time to time. He let out a long breath and turned to look at the old man in brown who had just arrived 2 days ago. Who is he? I don't know. The old man in brown came back to his senses and shook his head with difficulty with an ashen face. At this time, of course he knew that he was the one who attracted these evil stars. Humph! Zachary snorted coldly. If it weren't for the special situation now, he definitely wouldn't mind letting the old man in brown who caused them to fall into the situation go directly to see the light god. This person isn't a void-level cultivator, right? What should we do next? A senior member of the guild asked in a panic with lingering fear. Squinting at the figure disappearing behind the hill, Zachary shouted in a deep voice, "What are you panicking for? If the other party is really a void-level warrior, can we still live now?" This was the truth. If the middle-aged man, just now, was really a void-level warrior, he only needed to fly in the sky and attack randomly. He didn't dare to say that he could kill everyone here, but these senior members who were not low in status and strength would undoubtedly be dead. Of course, Zachary didn't know that Tangen's situation was a bit special. Although his strength was comparable to a void-level warrior, because he didn't cultivate the power system of another world, he really couldn't fly. After pondering for a moment, Zachary waved his hand with a gloomy face. Everyone on guard continued to move forward. Then he looked back again. His eyes were gloomy, and he secretly said in his heart, "If you have the guts, continue to follow and see who dies first in the end." Zachary didn't know what to do and was secretly furious. After Tang disappeared into the hill, he met with David and others who were waiting here. "Boss, how is it?" Because they were afraid that the other party might have a backup plan, David and the others didn't participate in this raid. Shaking his head, Tang touched his chin. "It's a bit strange. The other party doesn't seem to have a void-level powerhouse to help this time." "Haha, that's good." David didn't think much when he heard this and laughed. "As long as we plan well, then this chase is in the bag." "I hope so." He didn't want to think about things that he couldn't figure out. Anyway, now that he had a rare advantage, Tang nodded and smiled with emotion. "Haha, it's not easy. Being chased until now, I didn't expect that there would be a time when I was chasing others. Thinking about it, I'm a little excited." Chapter 758. If one were to look at Tang On's experiences in the past few years in the other world, then the glorious title of the most unlucky transmigrator in history would definitely belong to him. First, he was in danger of being erased by the system. Then he was hunted down by Bose's police station, then by Blank's army, then by the Dust Hunter group, then by Sylvia, then by Lon Shah and his men. Until the end, he simply became a wanted criminal in the whole continent. The tragic experience along the way was simply enough to make those who heard it cry and those who saw it grieve. It could be said to be a real transmigration tragedy. But now, Tang finally tasted something different. One day, he could actually turn around and hunt down others. Really delightful to hear and see. In the afternoon, after the previous short surprise attack, half a day of peace and tranquility, which also made the tense Zachary and the others finally breathe a sigh of relief. But it was also at this moment that suddenly whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. With a piercing whistle, 3 pitch-black arrows shot rapidly from the left side of the team in a triangular formation. "Sir, be careful." The Earth Stage martial artist's reaction was extremely fast, and he quickly determined that these arrows were coming for Zachary and the other higher-ups. With a roar, he moved sideways to block them, and a domineering sword light instantly swung out to intercept them. Bang, bang, bang. As expected, although the 3 arrows were extremely accurate because the distance was too far before they could get close, they were hit and exploded by the sword light in the air. At the same time, 5 or 6 Earth Stage martial artists rushed out of the team, carrying a murderous aura as they ran in the direction of the arrows. This series of responses was quick and swift, and the division of labor was orderly, obviously prearranged. But it was also at this moment that a flustered and exasperated roar suddenly came from the team. "Ooh, it's you again." It turned out that when everyone's attention was attracted to the left side of the team, the sallow-faced, middle-aged man from before once again charged in from the end of the team. This time, his target was extremely clear. He did not bother with the guards at all, and directly charged towards Zachary and the others in the middle of the team. "Stop him." More than 10 Earth Stage martial artists were originally inseparable from the higher-ups of the guild. Seeing this, they hurriedly stepped forward and attacked together. "Huh." With a long laugh, Twain advanced instead of retreating. His figure flickered, turned, and dodged, and he became even more ghostly and nimble. The surrounding guards often only felt that a saber strike that they were confident and was already empty by the time it struck down. Here, over here. Block him. F***CK. Who the F***CK are you chopping? It was chaos, mixed with the angry screams of those who were accidentally injured by their own people. The previously neat defensive formation became a mess after a short moment, and they were battered and exhausted. Not only did they not Earth Stage martial artists, but they also to the Earth Stage martial artists. The Earth Stage martial artists' Earth Stage of the World Stage were of the Earth Stage of Time's world. Of them could not help but Roru roared. Of course, this was said to the Earth Stage martial artists. But as soon as the voice fell, the ghostly Tang narrowed his long and narrow eyes and glanced at the Earth Stage martial artist. With a whoosh, he broke out of the encirclement in an instant and quickly brandished his dagger to kill. The reason was very simple. Those who could command the Earth Stage martial artists were naturally the higher-ups of the guild. Tangan did not know who among them was the disguised Zachary. He could only use this simple method to determine. The so-called shot hits the bird that sticks out was also the reason. The Earth Stage martial artist was not Zachary. But seeing Tang In, who was obviously coming towards him, his face turned pale. He knew that he had made a low-level mistake. He hurriedly retreated. Kill him! Kill him! After the surrounding Earth Stage martial artists heard the order, they no longer hesitated. Their footsteps paused, and their hands shot out colorful and violent fighting lights, crazily pressing down. Tang and was still some distance away from the Earth Stage martial artists, and this distance was the opportunity for the Earth Stage martial artists. They would rather kill each other now than kill this threatening guy on the spot. Tangan did not look back. He just grabbed casually while sprinting, and a guard involuntarily rose into the air, dancing and flying towards the violent fighting lights behind him. The colorful fighting lights were the combined attacks of 10 Earth Stage martial artists. Not to mention a small guard. Even if a Void Stage martial artist came over, he would have to temporarily avoid the attack. So, the end of this guard could naturally be imagined. Bang! There was no scream, just a touch, and the guard's body directly exploded in the air. Nothing else could be seen. Only a large amount of blood mist instantly diffused and shrouded the scene. The violent fighting lights were not hindered by the slightest pause and still pressed down rapidly. Looking at the blood mist shrouding over, the constantly retreating Earth Stage martial artists could no longer see Tang En's figure in their line of sight. They subconsciously narrowed their eyes, and their pupils suddenly shrank sharply. An inconspicuous blood-colored blade light was sandwiched in the blood mist, quietly flying in front of their eyes. At this moment, the Earth Stage martial artist only felt that time seemed to slow down. He watched helplessly as the blood-colored dagger pierced between his eyes inch by inch, right in the middle of his eyebrows. Boom! The colorful fighting lights finally exploded. The airwaves rolled, and the previous blood mist was instantly swept away. At the same time, dozens of guards who could not dodge in time were swept away. In an instant, their limbs were broken and scattered in the air. In fact, the 10 Earth Stage martial artists had tried to suppress their attack range as much as possible. Otherwise, everyone present was afraid that no one would have a good time. But Dochi was originally overbearing, and their controllability was also limited. As a result, the surrounding guards naturally became sacrificial lambs. No one noticed that the Earth Stage martial artist had died. Everyone's eyes were focused on the explosion of the fighting lights, as if they were facing a great enemy. Was he dead? Just as doubts arose, there was a sudden scream of horror here. Everyone suddenly turned their heads and saw that the sallow-faced, middle-aged man had actually come to the periphery of the crowd. Blood was faintly seeping out of the corner of his mouth. It seemed that he had also suffered a little, but it was clear that compared to the large-scale internecine effect caused by the fighting lights, this loss was really too small. He, chuckling a few times, Tang In calmly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He stretched out his thumb and slowly drew across his throat. Facing the 10 Earth Stage martial artists, Zachary and other Earth Stage martial artists, he made a throat-cutting gesture. Then, leaving the mess behind, he swaggered off. The meaning of this action was obvious. Even if there were many guards, so what? If I want to kill you, who can stop me? A moment later, the few Earth Stage martial artists who had previously chased in the direction of the arrow turned back. They saw that the atmosphere of the team was stiff and cold. Most of the guards were injured, and they were throwing dozens of their companions' bodies into the ditch by the road. Among them was an Earth Stage martial artist with a hole in his forehead. Startled, looking at Zachary's gaze, an Earth Stage martial artist shook his head and sighed, "We didn't catch up." The other party retreated too quickly. Hearing this, Zachary's livid face became even more unsightly. He then took a breath and waved his hand. "Continue forward." After that, the day and night passed in the midst of continuous assassination and assassination. In fact, the overall strength of Tangen's side was slightly inferior. That's right, Tangen's personal strength was very high. If it was a one-on-one fight, including those Earth Stage martial artists, no one was his opponent. But when 15 or 16 Earth Stage martial artists gathered together, the situation was different. Just like the scene when Tangen escaped from the Imperial City in the northern wilderness, more than a dozen experts of the fierce Eagle tribe attacked the mountain together. He could only desperately dodge. And because the other party came from the Bounty Hunter Guild, they were familiar with all kinds of assassination methods. David and the others could only do most of the things from the side, otherwise there would be casualties. Of course, Tangen naturally wouldn't use his shortcomings to clash head-on with the other party's strengths. After a day and a night of pursuit, constantly looking for and creating opportunities to put pressure on the other party and attack their morale. Given Tangen's strength, as long as he launched a surprise attack, the other party would definitely suffer more or less casualties. After losing a few of their companions, those Earth Grade fighters also recognized the difference in strength between the two sides. They no longer dared to hope that they could surround Twain, and only stubbornly protected the upper echelons of the guild, allowing those guards to continuously die in the successive clashes. Although Zachary and the others were repeatedly assassinated and had to flee in a sorry state, Xiang Nan's determination never changed. Finally, the stalemate was broken in a steep canyon. Luke fired 5 explosive arrows in a row, shattering the rocks above the canyon and crushing the fleeing team below. Tangen took advantage of the chaos to kill 3 upper echelons of the guild and 5 Earth Stage martial artists, securing victory in one fell swoop. In this situation, Zachary finally stopped being on the run and had every upper echelon take some guards and flee separately. It had to be said that there was nothing Tangen could do about it. At this point, there were only 5 upper echelons of the Bounty Hunter Guild left, but because everyone was in disguise, Tangen couldn't be sure who was Zachary. Of course, it was just a little helplessness. While they could rely on luck to temporarily avoid being hunted down if they split up, once the guards were scattered, Tangen would only need to spend a little more time to wipe out the other party. With victory right in front of him, Tangen indecisively led a few members of the Gray Space in pursuit, while David, Harry, and the others split up to chase after them. Now that the difference in strength between the two sides was obvious, Tangen couldn't be bothered to hide anymore. He sped up with a few people, and after about 15 minutes, he stopped a dozen people who were fleeing. 2 injured Earth Stage martial artists, 7 or 8 guards, and a curly-haired old man in a black robe, who was also an upper echelon of the guild. When the curly-haired old man saw that it was Tangen, his face turned ashen and his body trembled. Tangen sized him up and smacked his lips. "Tis TSK, Zachary." No. The curly-haired old man shook his head in panic. "Oh." Twain nodded his head non-committally and waved his hand, taking the lead to charge towards the 2 Earth Stage warriors with ugly expressions. The 2 Earth Stage martial artists certainly knew of Tangen's strength. Their injuries were also caused by Tangen. After looking at each other, they simply abandoned the curly-haired old man and ran away at the same time. Damn it. Don't go, come back, all of you come back." Reaching out his arms in vain, The curly-haired old man's expression was first shocked and angry, but then it turned into a desperate plea. Seeing this, Tangen's footsteps also paused. Looking at the two fleeing Earth stage martial artists, he thought for a moment and decided not to chase after them and kill them all. Of course, this was not kindness, but it was unnecessary. What's more, after killing the Earth stage martial artists, Tang In would definitely get a lot of blood and chi, and the old butler reminded him to control his blood and chi level. Since the Earth stage martial artists had fled, the 7 or 8 guards naturally would not stay and wait for death. Avoiding the curly-haired old man's desperate gaze, they also chose to scatter and flee. In less than a minute, only the curly-haired old man with trembling legs was left in the field. It was not that he did not want to escape, but he knew that with his identity, the other party would definitely not let him go. Trembling, he took out a short sword from his arms and shouted in a threatening manner, "Don't come over. I'm warning you. Don't come over. You don't dare to kill me." Shaking his head, Tangen stepped in front of the curly-haired old man and calmly reached out to grab the short sword. "It's useless. The Temple of Light can't protect you." "Oh, the short sword is not bad. Thanks." He took the short sword and looked it over in his palm, praised it, and casually threw it back. A member of the gray space behind him happily caught it and put it away. The curly-haired old man opened his mouth, but he was unable to say anything when his greatest reliance was revealed so easily. With a flip of his hands, more than 10 shiny silver needles appeared between Tang Un's fingers. "Okay, let's do a simple one." Relax, the pain's only a little. Although time was not tight, Tang In naturally did not want to waste time on the curly-haired old man. He directly used the silver needles to force a confession and asked what he wanted to know. "Rodney? Damn, why didn't you say it was not Zachary?" Boss, he seemed to have said it wasn't him just now, so it's like this." "Then you can't blame me, right? Why are you blindly telling the truth?" "I don't know which direction Zachary escaped in. F***CK, I've worked for nothing." Scratching his head, Tang In casually pushed away the curly-haired old man who had several silver needles in his head and whose facial features were bleeding. He got up and shook his head. King knew my luck wouldn't be good." Just as Tang In was complaining, he looked up and saw a figure in the distance running towards them. "This is Lei Ji, right?" The young man who had just obtained a good short sword narrowed his eyes and said softly. Lei Ji, a member of the second stage gray space under David. After rushing over, he panted and said, "Boss, the captain has found Zachary's whereabouts." "Huh?" Tang And was overjoyed when he heard this. "Then what are you waiting for? Take me there quickly." Every upper echelon had more or less a few surviving Earth stage warriors. Zachary's position was high, so naturally there were more. As the saying goes, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Although those Earth stage warriors were basically injured, David, Harry, and the others naturally could not beat them. So they were only responsible for tracking and ensuring that they did not lose face. The matter of fighting had to be handed over to Tang In. Panting, Lei Ji spread his hands. "However, there was an accident. The captain wants you to hurry over and take a look. Between the mountains and steep ridges. Thank you for coming in time. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have been killed." "Thank you. Thank you very much." Zachary, who had been fleeing in panic until now, finally breathed a sigh of relief. He showed a look of great relief and kept bowing to express his gratitude. "Sir Zachary, you're too polite. This is what we should do." The handsome young man in holy armor stepped forward and reached out to support him. "On the contrary, we should thank you. Thank you for your generosity all these years." "Oh, it's nothing." After exchanging pleasantries, Zachary took the remaining men and merged into the large group of knights that had just arrived. The team set off again, still heading south. It was at this time that the valiant woman standing beside the handsome young man, who had been silent all this time, frowned slightly. Her gaze swept over the wounded Earth stage warriors. These people, their strength is not bad, and their murderous aura is very strong. Do you know Zachary? I just heard of him." The handsome young man shrugged. He seems to be a well-known philanthropist. Every year, he donates millions of donations to the temple. The valiant woman's expression eased slightly when she heard this, and she nodded in realization. I see. No wonder the temple still ordered us to protect his safety at this time. Yes, this could be a big client. Hee hee. After a few chuckles, the handsome young man's expression turned serious. He looked at Zachary's guards and touched his chin, but he seems to have offended some great people this time. 4 Earth Stage warriors and dozens of guards with strong strength. TSK, TSK. He could still be beaten so miserably. It seems that the pressure on our mission this time is not small. The valiant woman shook her head indifferently. It's our duty to protect the safety of believers. That's right. After echoing, the handsome young man looked at the woman beside him and said hesitantly, after this mission is completed, you should go back to the south with me. Hey, I'm very observant. I held back for a long time and didn't say anything. Your condition is obviously not right. You'd better go back and adjust. The valiant woman pursed her lips and shook her head to refuse. No, I can't leave the north, at least not in a short time. Just because of that heretic called Tangin? As if something was said, the valiant woman suddenly turned her head, her eyes as sharp as a knife. The handsome young man spread out his palms innocently. I didn't mean to investigate this. You've been in a strange state since you came back from the northern wilderness, plus you were on that ship before. It's easy to guess. After looking at each other for a moment, the valiant woman took the lead to look away, leaving a cold sentence, and continued to ride the horse forward. I will never leave the north until I kill him with my own hands. The handsome young man couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly. But you don't know where he is now. I can wait. Wait until he appears. And, pause for a while, the valiant woman said expressionlessly, I should have seen him in Emoma City a few days ago. En? Emoma City? The handsome young man was stunned, and then raised his hand to support his forehead. Oh, that's not a good memory. I've never been so embarrassed in my life. Behind a low hill about a few hundred meters away from the cavalry team, Tang In maintained his posture of looking forward. His face was blank, and his eyes were blank. He didn't move for a long time. After a while, the cavalry team went farther and farther away. Tang In still seemed to be unable to believe his eyes. He raised the binoculars and looked again for a while, falling into a long silence again, until the cavalry team completely disappeared behind the mountains. Tang In took a deep breath, turned over, and rubbed his forehead with a tangled expression. Sylvia, Owens, I'm confused. Why do I see you two everywhere? You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.